Go live. Oh, that hurt. Hello everyone, right then, and welcome to a live video. Yes, repeating, this is a live video, so if you don't like lives, as I always announce, please, that's fine. Secondly, so, I've been feeling a little unwell for the last week, and the reason I'm telling you this now is because instead of it turning into a nice normal cold with me sneezing, what it has turned into is blocking of my ears alternately with the stuff that comes back from your nose going down the passage. Do not ask me why it's fun, and I went to a doctor and basically got told it's just you just run down, okay? It's just annoying, and you get it over. It'll either turn into a proper cold or it'll turn into a proper ear infection, in which case we'll treat you. I went, that's great. I'd prefer to be treated before I get to the proper ear infection stage, and there's a few things I want to do soon, and I'd rather not have an ear infection affecting my balance while I'm doing them, dangling off ladders and doing other things. But we'll see. We'll see what life will happen. But anyway, that means this evening, I'm probably not going to turn up on Discord afterwards. So I'm going to be leaving the running of Discord to the people who run Discord. Which is going to be, of course, Leslie, Steve, Paul, and Runon. They are the Masters at Arms, and they will happily have the Discord chat afterwards, and make sure you all get to have the chat and discussion you like to have on a Thursday. I might pop in, I might not. It's going to depend on how my ears feel at the end of the live. That's honestly what I'm going to say. Either way, I won't be hanging around for a long time, because believe it or not, despite these earphones being absolutely lovely and absolutely great, it's not the most fun thing to do to wear earphones while your ears blocked up. Fun times. So, who have we got? So, hello, we have Knight 6831, Runon, Peter, well, honestly, Knight 6831, I haven't walked into that particular question because you've decided to come with a question before you even saw the video. And I hate to tell you, but there isn't going to be much about the treaty in this, because this is drivers of air groups, of the ocean carrier groups over the last 100 or so years. The treaties don't last that long in that phase, and they really don't have much of an impact. Size of air groups, yes, but evolution of carrier air groups, not really the biggest. And even size of air groups can be interesting. Hello, Grunon. Hello, Conversable. Hello, Jacob. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Paul. Hello, Dave Harrison. Hello, Alistair Crow. Hello, Leslie Mitchell. Hello, Paul. Hello, Mark Harkness. And hello, everyone who's been here. Stephen Richards. Hello. Hello, Michael Cooch. Hello, DGV40. And yeah. Hello, everyone. And Blackburn Maximus. And James C. Stanley. Hello. And Stephen Richards. Hello. You are bleeding. Yeah, don't worry. As I tried to explain the other day, I had a wart on here, and it took blooming forever to try and get a medical appointment to deal with it, because you're supposed to get them dealt with again by a doctor. And I got so fed up with it, I brought Bazooka Veruca, which I tend to use if I get things on my feet, because for those of us who are swimmers, we know we get these things. It's a fact of life. You go swimming in a public pool, you get ear infections, and you get verrucas and warts. It just happens. You have dogs as well, who like to scratch you occasionally because they don't realise their claws are sharp, and yes, you get the same thing, so you just deal with it. And I just went, well, shh. And, first it turns black, because it freezes it, and then it turns a reddish colour as all blood, and then it drops off, and you get this kind of look. And I think it's mostly gone, but I'm not sure. I think I might have to do a second treatment in about a week or so's time. So then you've got another week. I know it's health-wise, I'm great at the moment. It's it's just wonderful. And I was having this conversation because of sorting things out and trying to get the ears looked at. And I did love that because I didn't see my normal GP. I saw someone else because my normal GP's not that well themselves, which was great fun here. And they went, "So, do you have anything stressful going on in your life at the moment which might be affecting your health?" Yeah, I'm moving house. I'm between principal jobs. I have basically a ongoing portfolio career. I have people keep changing their minds about how much pictures are going to cost for books. Yeah, no, it's not the most stressful life in the world, but yes, I have something going on. There are people out there who have a lot more stress and are a lot worse than me. I'm not going to claim it's super stressful, but it's not exactly a picnic either. And honestly, I've never been that big a fan of picnics. I never understood what was the idea of, we will go and spread a blanket on the ground, have food which is cold, and sit here while ants try and get to us on the ground. Yes, it's a picturesque place, but if you plan the hike properly, you can end up at a decent restaurant for all the meal times. Yes, I am recommended to try steam baths to loosen it all. And yes, we will try. The steam bath system is being tried. I have a steam thing. No, suggests that life, high cost of life is something entirely. I agree. I agree. There are some places it's not. It's like I, I, I was honestly having this conversation with a friend recently because we were talking about fish and chips. Just a random conversation in the UK. And it was a random one about fish and chips. And they're going, wow, fish and chips up here. It was so cheap the other day. It was £18 for my fish and chips. And I was sitting there going, last time I had fish and chips, I was in Cornwall, and £18 bought fish and chips for 2 people. Did that buy... No, it was £18 each. Oh. So how long a time period will this cover? This covers from the beginning to the modern day. This is what this is about. This is also known... there are going to be a few other things included in this which are going to cause some fun. So yeah. Today's video, today's live, is about the drivers of the evolution of carrier air groups. Yeah. If it's a virus, there is... My doctor has this theory it might just be I'm run down. Because they also said, oh, and this was the lovely thing, this was the one I went, oh, how many hours sleep do you get? I said, have you read my notes? They went, oh, you're that Alex Clarke. How are you still here? I don't need much sleep. I suggest you try and get some more. That's just me laying on my bed awake. That's boring. Matt 26 Canadian dollars for recent fish and chips before tax. Youch. And I do agree, shop rent is far higher near London. It is. Also, you're far less likely to have... they're far less likely for the fish and chip shop to have been in your family for several generations and completely paid off as a property. I think that is a slightly small advantage. Hello, Megascrow. How Stufford? Oh, well. Okay, so the drivers of the evolution of carrier air groups. What is this video about? It's why do carrier air groups evolve? It's also going to be full of. I'm just going to admit it now. There are probably going to be 60-second shorts produced from this live, a dozen or so over the coming years. And if you haven't noticed that my channel started doing 60-second shorts, well, I'm not sure how. YouTube pushes them at you every 5 seconds. But leaving that to one side, I have, as you all know, am trying to crack that 15,000 subscriber number so that I can finally put to bed the whole aunt and mum bet. I need it to be over. So, shorts get a lot of views very quickly and attract a lot of new subscribers. What they do are interesting, I have to say, is they get a lot of new viewers. They're not always the best at converting new viewers into repeat viewers. But interestingly enough, what it shows with that one, the correlation between new viewers to repeat viewers, is the amount of comments on a video. So a video which has more comments will tend to turn more people from new viewers into repeat viewers. I'm not sure whether that's due to the number of comments, or the discussions it generates below, or what, but it's just an interesting point I've noticed. A la rat. Anyway, the drivers of the evolution of carrier groups. What are we talking about? We're talking about the role of air groups. We're talking about the role of carrier aircraft. In the nicest way, when you're talking about things like, oh, well, now we have this aircraft, we used to have that aircraft, that's a very simple evolution. That's jumping from one aircraft to the next. In this video, we're talking about what's evolving, pushing aircraft carriers and their air groups to evolve and continue to evolve. In many ways, it's an interesting snapshot into the last 100 or so, 100 plus years of war. In fact, you can take it back early. You could say it's a snapshot into the last 110 years of war. You could include seaplane carriers in it and bring it right up to date. Now, I've covered this topic in many ways from various angles over the years. It's a topic I'm familiar with covering, but it needs to be covered from multiple angles because, as I've said before, one of the things you learn when you're lecturing is that different people take things in from different angles. Doesn't matter what your route is into a subject. What matters is that you get to a point of the subject at which you're confident in it and you've learnt enough that you can express yourself in it. That you can formulate your own opinion based on the information available and provide an argument as to your opinion. That's what knowledge is. And then if you can go on and share that knowledge, share that argument, then hopefully that provides avenues for others into the subject and is how we spread knowledge, how humanity works. Well, the first thing you learn as a lecturer is that you can give a lecture to everyone, and it will probably reach about 60 to 70% of the theatre. Will actually go away fully rooted into the subject, because you have managed to cover that broader spectrum. But between 30 and 40% will be divided between those who are sort of in but sort of not sure where you're going, and those who are really really lost and really not getting the topic. Now, sometimes that's because people don't pay attention, but I'd love to say I don't think that's usually much of a problem in most of my lectures, and I don't think that's a problem on YouTube videos. So I'm not gonna rule it out completely, but let's be honest. In my lectures, most people tend to pay attention because they're never quite sure what kind of weird voice is going to come out next, and also because I have a habit of wandering around the room, and you really don't want to be surprised by me turning up next to you at your table. Or alternatively, Alternatively, there are many other things and tricks I have played over the years over my students. After all, for a while I did teach psychological warfare. That was carte blanche to do so many things. They had to be alive and whole at the end of the lecture. That was the criteria I was originally given. But rather like Canada in World War One, after the lectures were over, I got given new criteria. Oh. When we are talking about all this, though, as said, what's the best way to go and approach those kids who are 30, those people, students who are in the 30 to 40%? Well, then you try in the seminars, and you try different approaches in the seminars, and different routine. And I'll probably take it down to about 10%. And then you usually try a roundup lecture at the end of the year, where you're preparing people for exams, and you'll go into that topic again. And if you're really lucky, the students who are having trouble feel confident enough in you, they will come to you for a tutorial, a one-to-one session where they will ask you that question, and you can tailor how you're explaining the topic to them. And that's what you have to do. You have to think, hang on, what do I know about the student? What is this student's interest, and how do I link this in? How do I put this in a format the student can follow? So that's one of the reasons why I always maintained with this channel, I'm never afraid to repeat topics. They will never be done the same way twice, but I'm never afraid to repeat topics. There's a good discussion of picnics now going on in the chat. And £13 for cod and chips at Common Seafood Temple. Alive and whole as a wide topic. Yeah. So, shameless book plug. I have these for every video. I have these for every video for two reasons. One, A, liking, sharing, subscribing videos is the best way to grow the channel. And as I say in every video, these days it's my running gag. Naval history might not be a communicable disease, but I'm doing my jolly best, my absolute jolly best, to make it so. And secondly, I'm an academic. I need to promote my books, because otherwise I don't get promoted. Otherwise I don't get converted from contract to tenure, or even get contract roles. And finally, there's the fact that I'm quite honest, and I will always be honest on this channel, that this pays for my research. This pays for all the books I buy and all the trips I get to do, whether that's to Newcastle or Liverpool or Glasgow or wherever I go, or Cambridge, or recently down to Brighton and a few other places. That's all done thanks to this. That's all thanks to you. So without your support, that doesn't happen. And the vast majority of that, I have to admit, does come from memberships, and it comes from super chats and super thanks, etc. Because, as we all know, the ad revenue is never much on YouTube, but actually every bit counts. You know, I was looking at the shorts recently, and that's made, I think, about £5 over the last 28 days in terms of revenue. And what went through my head was, oh, that's good, because that's going to buy that book and that book in Kindle. And there's some short books, which are science fiction books, which I'm planning on doing using for a science fiction video coming up. And that's the thing. Every little bit helps. And this is what all like an episode. There were some really good videos recently about being a public historian and how you finance it, how you manage to survive and do it and support it through. And I was listening to a lot of discussions, and I was thinking, well, I'm sound to be lucky, but I also sound to be doing pretty much everything everyone thinks you should be doing. The only thing I'm not doing is really actively promoting OnlyFans, and I think I should really probably get an get my OnlyFans actually working at some point. I'm just I'm imagining some of your faces. Yeah, as you all know, I have said before, I do have backups in place. I have backups for YouTube, because that's one of the reasons why I have got the Twitch system going and got the Twitch thing going. If YouTube suddenly broke tomorrow, I could still do broadcasts on Twitch. I'd shift to those. It's why I have threads, as well as the WhatsApp message system, the WhatsApp sign up, and Facebook, as well as Twitter, aka X as it's now called, and that's why I have all those four systems for promoting stuff. And for saying, this is where I am, this is what I'm doing. And I have Patreon as my primary. And I also have an OnlyFans system set up, just in case anything happens to the Patreon. You'll need a more expensive hat. I like this hat. I've got a few like it. How much for the pictures for the books, and what are the plan books? Don't ask and don't ask. Basically, I have a plan to fund the pictures for the books. I'm quite honest about this one. I'm going to be probably doing a donathon. I've been toying around with it, and this was an interesting conversation I had with my mum recently, who, as we all know, has got into watching VTubers. And they all do donathons when they have expensive things, and they have goals, and they say how much they're raising towards each goal. And so, at some point this year, I'm going to do a history donathon, and basically the targets are going to be raising money to procure pictures for some of the things. Some people have already sent me some money towards pictures, and so they are going to be basically grandfathered in and included in that. And they're already going to get the things. And then the idea is going to be, it's going to go through the pictures, and then it's going to go through some of the research trip costs, and all those things are going to be marketed out on it and matched out, and it's going to be all run. That's the idea I'm currently toying with. It could be fun. I'm Night 6 everyone. The trouble is, this video is not about theoreticals. This video is about what actually happened and what those things. So if you have questions about theoreticals, please do feel free to save them for the end, but they're not going to be answered during the video. They'll be answered at the end. Good luck, Alistair. Enjoy the 600 cows. So, I demand an OnlyFans. Look, as said, the OnlyFans is set up. I think Melanie1640 has tracked it down. I seem to remember one of you, someone said they wanted to check if it really existed. And I said, yeah, go on. There you go. There's the link. You can find it. And they went, what the frigate? Yes, there is an OnlyFans set up. And I think I post a picture of one of the slides to it every month to keep it active. Something like that. I'm not sure if I remember to do it this month so far. Or rather last month. I have to go check that. So, yeah, this is basically how war and conflict managers changed in the last 100 years. You see, war 100 years ago looked something like this. And war 100 today looks something like this. And they don't look very different, do they, on the surface? You've got an armoured vehicle, you've got infantry. All can look very similar. and yet war can be incredibly different. Even one of these vehicles could shred an entire brigade of these. And that's the true problem. War can look the same, but its methodologies of management become very different. In the 1960s and 70s, you'd do an overflight with aircraft. These days, would an overflight of aircraft have the same impact? Yes, we can fly over you. Does that have the same impact it did in the 60s and 70s when potentially very few people had seen aircraft, let alone jet aircraft, fly over their heads? That is the true scenario we live with. Our methodologies, as in the things we choose to do, might not change. But the tools to do those things can change dramatically. Which can open new ways and new ways of doing those methodologies. You see, Conflict Management 101 comes down to deterrence, presence, and communication. Please note what I just said there. Deterrence, presence, and communication. Does that mean deterrence and presence and communication are separate things? No. Does it mean they're all the same things? No. You see, communication, if we start off at the back, requires communication, clear communication from the government, the foreign diplomatic service, and the militaries involved in terms of what they're doing. If you're going to be carrying out anything, if you're going to try and manage conflict, if you're going to try and coordinate conflict, you need to be able to clearly tell people what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Sorry, I'm slightly giggling it in the chat. I think Runon might be a little bit scared of Leslie. Now, when we go further with this, and we should go further with this, you then get into presence. Presence divides into continuous and visiting and non-existent. If you have a continuous presence, usually that is maintained by either a small ship visiting an area, which is being constantly patrolling around an area, which is of lower conflict risk, but also quite important interest. It can be maintained by a garrison. It can be maintained by all sorts of things, realistically. There was the island which was set between Denmark and Canada, and they just kept exchanging flags and bottles of alcohol over years, over the ownership of the island. And then the diplomats went and blooming well resolved it. Seriously, that had been a perfectly friendly exchange of alcohol for years. And the diplomats have to go and resolve it, so there's no more exchanging of alcohol. Do you realise how annoyed they made their navies, respectively? Now, when we get further into this, you start to see where they start to intermix, because the deterrent itself, that's requires communication of exactly what the ships are doing, ships or whatever systems you're using for deterrence are doing. This is a Naval History channel, so of course we're going to emphasize ships. It's going to require government communicating what they're doing and the Foreign Office doing the usual thing of actually telling people what they're doing repeatedly. Because often you need to tell your own domestic media, you need to tell international media, you need to tell the governments, and you need to tell your own people, who will need to tell everyone again what they're doing, so it's consistent. Because nothing makes countries more nervous than inconsistencies. And if you're trying to deter and manage a conflict, the last thing you want to do in that scenario is add in a source of inconsistency, because that's going to cause more trouble. Now, if you've got an ongoing presence and ongoing communication in a certain area, and there is a risk of conflict coming up, it is far easier for you to deter it because you have an ongoing basis for your presence and to grow your presence. So if you already usually have a patrol ship in that area, and you decide, hang on, a destroyer is coming to visit. Brand new destroyer, yes. It's doing a world cruise. It's coming to visit. Then that's basically saying, I'm interested in this area. You know I'm interested in this area. I'm always part of this area. At the moment, I'm really interested in what's going on. And normally you say and make those announcements without actually telling any of the parties who are at risk of conflict, like the ones, especially ones who are aggressive, that you're going to. Because you're not making it about them. It's about your interest in the area. Now, if they continue being annoying, then your next option is twofold. You can decide whether you want to do exercises with your allied power, or the power you're trying to support and stop having the conflict being waged on them. That's always a good option. Or you can make direct contact with the person who's being aggressive, and you can basically say, so here is what you're planning on doing. Don't. We are involved in this area. We would find your actions on this basis very annoying and very disruptive. We do not like being disrupted. So, don't. Now, normally, diplomats will not put that quite so bluntly. If you really want fun, if you ever hear a diplomat talk quite so bluntly, then you realise you're in very, very serious doo-doo. You just are. Those are options. And then it moves up from there. If they don't listen to a destroyer turning up, well, it's a carrier battle group. Or it's an amphibious task group. Or it might be both. You see, you put an amphibious task group there because you don't want to send troops and don't want to base troops in your ally, just in case they do something stupid and you decide not to support them. But so you can quickly have forces there. And no one can complain about your forces being there, because they're not on anyone's territory, they're in international waters. But everyone also knows why they're there. If you want a good example of this, not too long ago, Sierra Leone. The British did a classic example of this and ended up deploying Royal Marines and Paras into Sierra Leone, supported by amphibious forces, well, ships providing the amphibious capability and lift, to make sure everything did not go bad. Because the sides involved in the conflict had taken things to the level at which the British were sufficiently interested to go, no, it doesn't go on. And when you think of conflict management, you have to remember it's not just a thing which the largest countries do. All countries do this, at all levels. If you're your own country, and it's your own border you're looking at, then you should make sure you have a presence on that border. You need to make sure, show interest in your border. Because otherwise that can cause problems, and people can read things into you not being interested in your own borders as a country. Especially if you have a next door neighbour who has avarice in their soul, or any of the other things that can drive them to do all sorts of little, well, you weren't watching it, so I decided it was now mine. This can cause fun. Regularly can cause fun. And you can again decide how you're going to escalate and how you're going to put forces involved. And again, this is a thing with clear messaging. Are you calling up the reserves? Are you calling up the reserves for a scheduled exercise? Or is it an unscheduled exercise? Do you have a habit of doing unscheduled exercises? This is one of the things. If you want the ability to call up your reserves whenever you want, without it being necessarily a alarm to everyone around you, you need to start a pattern of having unscheduled exercises. So you have 2 a year, which are announced only the day before they're happening and call-ups happening. And basically you say, well, yes, we like to do this every year because we want to test our ability to call our reserves up. Yes, it disrupts our economy, but it's part of our national security strategy. And you make sure you do one of those by about June in any year. So you do one in any 6-month period. And you hold on to them. So basically, if you need to use it earlier in the June, you use it. And if you're really, really clever, what you do is every now and again you make it 3 exercises in the year. So we checked our systems because they all thought because they were just only 2, there wouldn't be a 3rd. Aha, we had the 3rd. So, you do that so that people aren't surprised when you rapidly call up your reserves. And again, these things are all about conflict management. It's about setting the training levels of your forces, but also setting up the expectations of your neighbours and potential opponents. And it's, again, if we want to go into more the conflict management, there's the continuous at sea deterrence, the nuclear deterrent. Why is that continually at sea? Why don't we have only 2 boats and have 1 available to deploy? Because, as I said, the thing you don't want to add into a high-tense situation is more uncertainty. If you're at a high-risk situation, and it's the kind of scenario where you might need that strategic deterrent at sea, so you can deter them using their weapons, and they can't do a first strike to take it out before it can launch, then you have to deploy it. There is no way to deploy a submarine of that scale going through any facilities without someone noticing it. And they will be watching. Everyone will be watching it. So that will raise the risk. That will raise the threat. Everyone will go, oh, you deployed your ballistic missile submarine. Is that a threat? Well, it's not. It's a second tier. It's a second strike system. It's not designed for a first strike. Doesn't matter though. That's now raising the threat. Whereas if your submarines are always there, rather than being a raising of the threat, they are a ceiling. Okay, if I use nuclear, biological, chemical weapons at you, doesn't matter how successful my first strike is, your second strike is going to wipe me out. So there is no point in me going for that level. Now, that doesn't mean I can't do other things to you, because if I have my own nuclear weapons, you can't use those back if I devastate you with conventional weapons. But it stops me being able to use non-conventional weapons. Or rather, if it doesn't stop me, it means that if I use them, I know the risks I'm running. The risk I'm running is that you'll use them straight back on me. So it creates a sort of ceiling to the style of conflict. So it creates a ceiling to the weapons used. That's what nuclear deterrence is about. Some people think it's about stopping conflict entirely. Nuclear deterrence never stops conflict entirely. There have been nuclear weapons around now for over 80 years. It doesn't stop it. What it does do is create a ceiling on it. It's a form of conflict management. There is a reason we call it conflict management rather than just deterrence or peace. Because A, it's an ongoing process, and B, this is more important for fighting, sometimes you cannot deter the conflict, but you can hopefully manage it so it doesn't become more widespread or doesn't involve the use of weapons which can cause mass destruction. And this is a major factor in how we manage air groups today and how we manage warfare. And this has all been coming along for the last 100 or so years. And this is fed into the weapons and into the systems we use. There is a joke about a novice lawyer solving a decades-old legal case and his father dressing him down since he'd ruined the family legal business. Yeah, I've heard that one. Don't. The French new carrier is a long way away. Luke Delport, so it's a big stick that everyone does not want to get hit with or get hit with. Pretty much. There was I think in one of the videos recently I put in a discussion of walking softly and carrying a big stick. Exactly where you carry the stick has a reference for your discussion. Because if you carry the stick openly in your front hands, that can look aggressive. If you carry it like a rifle on your shouldered, that can also look aggressive. If you carry it behind you, people might not see it. And as I said, in the end, what you need is a really big stick, like a quarterstaff, or something like that, which you can have over your back and have a nice sort of thing on to hold, so it sticks out and is very obvious, but leaves your hands completely free. So you basically want to walk softly with a very big stick, but not have it in your hands, because that can look too aggressive. And if you look too aggressive when you're doing deterrence, you can actually start the conflict you want to avoid. And showing up a big carrier does not work every time. There is a myth that the carrier groups turn up, and that stops war. It doesn't. Not every time. It stops a lot of the time, and sometimes the carrier groups even being near stops wars. Again, one of the things you have to remember is how many conflicts never happen because someone automatically said, hang on, automatically thought in their head, if we do that, they get involved, so that's not even an option. Conflict management and deterrence saves more lives and money every year than anything else. This is the true myth of defense spending. Because if you properly structure your armed forces and your foreign policy and your diplomacy and spending on your ambassadors and foreign service, etc., and you properly spend on that, and you do that properly, you won't be able to stop all conflicts. But the money you'll save from the conflicts that were never even thought about happening, let alone the ones which are deterred from happening, will more than pay for that 1,000,000 times over. Because fighting a war, being forced to fight a war, is always more costly than deterring one. And that's the true scenario when people start talking in the 1920s and 30s and are looking at the treaty scenario of, well, if no treaties happen, what does the Royal Navy, did the British government spend the money on the Navy that they did historically? Do they spend the money, do they build those capital ships? They will, because the fundamental idea of the British Empire is that it's militarily not strong enough to defend itself in terms of its army. It's too massive. So the thing that secures it is the image of having a strong navy. And it is far cheaper to pay for the image and necessity to maintain that image of having the world's strongest navy than is to fight the wars and deal with the economic disruption caused by the wars that would be caused by people actually attacking you. And the governments understand this. It's like with today when we're talking about the American defense budget. One of the reasons why I swear the American defense budget is so huge is because by starting it so much, they make it already they're spending like 1,000,000 times what we can spend. There is no chance of us fighting them. Why would we even consider it? And that is an image behind when their carrier turns up. Hello, I knew I could be 4472. But myself, if the Royal Navy had built the CVA-1 carriers, we wouldn't have had to spend the money on Falklands War. No. It's very doubtful we would have had to fight the Falklands War. Very, very doubtful. My Highness, it's important that everyone understands the difference between losing and not winning, as Cadet Kirk once put it. Yes. The thing is with nuclear weapons is if they're fired, then everyone loses. Everyone loses. No one wins. That's a no-win scenario, and that's, again, part of their factor in terms of their systems. Now, there's already been some discussions about aircraft changing size. Well, they have done, and I thought you'd like these little stats. So I did the strike aircraft of most navies, which actually have strike aircraft, in 1918 to 2024. And it is the Sopwith Cuckoo. Yes, it's not the Sopwith Camel, it's the Sopwith Cuckoo. As we can see, that's length of that aircraft, 8.69 metres, versus the F-35B Lightning, 15.6 metres. Means the aircraft is now 80% bigger in terms of length. Wingspan, 14.25 metres versus 10.7 metres. 25% smaller. Height, 3.25 metres. The F-35B Lightning, 4.36 metres. That's 34% bigger. Empty weight for a Sopwith Cuckoo, 997 kilograms, or just under a ton. For an F-35B Lightning, empty weight is 14,729 kilograms. Or nearly, well, let's be honest, that's practically 15 tons between, the quarter of a ton between friends is nothing, is it? And so that's roughly 1,377% bigger. And then we have gross weight, maximum takeoff weight. Comparison, 1,761 kilograms on the Sopwith Cuckoo. That was their heaviest weight when they're fully loaded. And the F-35B Lightning is 27,200 kilograms. Not only is he dropping a torpedo onto a F-35B, he's dropping a torpedo onto a US Marine Corps F-35B taking off from HMS Queen Elizabeth. Hello, Mike Cavello. So, maximum speed. Well, here's an interesting thing. The Sopwith Cuckoo, we know, was 105.5 miles per hour. The F-35B is approximately Mach 1.6. Approximately Mach 1.6. That's roughly 1,054% faster. Range, 335 miles. For Sopwith Cuckoo, F-35B Lightning, greater than 900 nautical miles. And so that's 215.4% greater. Or greater than 215.4% greater. Ceiling, 12,100 feet versus 50,000 feet. Okay, 305% greater. And then, when you start to look at the entire weapon systems, armament. Sopwith Cuckoo could carry a single 18-inch Mark 9 torpedo. The guns, 125mm, a 4-barrel rotary cannon, 180 rounds. Hard points, 4 internal stations, 6 external stations on wings with a capacity of 5,700 pounds internal, 15,000 pounds external, 18,000 pounds total weapons payload. There's a big difference going on there. And I would add, please note, as with all modern equipment, This is the stats which are the stats as declared in open sources and the stats as coordinated on Wikipedia, which is by open reference sources. And I have checked. And I have been very careful with these stats. I am not giving anything away. So before anyone decides to come knocking on my door, go check Wikipedia yourself. If it's on there, you can't claim it's secret. Now, theoretically, it could carry, let's see, capacity of 6 external stationary wings with a capacity of 15,000 pounds external. So, yeah, they could probably carry 6 of the torpedoes. External, in theory. In practice, no. Because I don't think their hard points are fitted up to it. But, you know, in theory. Hello, Cody 85. Now, Raptorat, in reference to a picture of Cuckoo I saw recently, did it have the torpedo tension wire? The pic seemed indicated it did, but was also altered. No. It didn't have the tension wire. It had... Well, it had its own interesting systems, but basically it was... the Sopwith Cuckoo was where the British really started to find out that the torpedoes keep diving down deep. I don't think there are any... I don't think there are any torpedoes certified for the F-35B. I will check this. Weapons. I cannot, on the website I'm using, which is a publicly available website, find any reference to them being able to carry torpedoes. But I also love that there is all sorts of interesting questions about who exactly owns the British F-35Bs. There's all sorts of interesting language of whether they're owned by the Royal Air Force but jointly operated, or owned jointly by the services and jointly operated. And from what I understand, it's the systems administered by the Royal Air Force, and jointly the aircraft are jointly owned and jointly operated, but it's administered by the Royal Air Force. So they're on the Air Force's order of... Well, they were originally, when there was an 809 squadron, were all under the Air Force's order of battle, but they might well have, with 809, might have moved over to the Royal Navy's order of battle, which only was stood up in December 2023. So this is where there's the fun stuff. So just in terms of weight, the F-35 could carry 4.5 fully loaded Sopwith Cuckoos. 2.2 pounds to a kilogram, so let's say 4 fully loaded Sopwith Cuckoos, yes. Blackman Maximus, please don't take this the wrong way, but don't add to the joys of my life by saying there are going to be more leaks on War Thunder when they add the F-35 to the game. That's not good for my soul. Scottish Nerd, it is believed in the 70s flew a strike mission from the Atlantic to prevent invasion of Belize. It's true. It happened. There's a very good book written about it called Phoenix Squadron. And there is a lot of it's very evidentially claimed, and you even have American sources who were in talks with the Guatemala, was it Venezuela or Guatemala? I think it's Guatemalan government. Was it Guatemalan? Well, with the government which was planning on invading, which basically said, well, with our Air Force, we thought we'd certainly win. And then Buccaneers, and then later on Phantoms showed up. We decided that we didn't have much of a chance. Because, believe it or not, the Air Force, which was mostly made up of P-51 Mustangs, was kind of... the Phantoms were going to have difficulty going that slowly, but they would work it out. Guatemala, yeah. I thought it was them, but I didn't want to say, because part of me going, was it Venezuela? For some reason, Venezuela was ringing the bell for something else. Landmaxers. I think in that scenario, A, the helicopters usually carrying the torpedoes as well in the UK, and B, the Royal Navy has two types of anti-submarine warfare helicopter. They have the Merlin and the Lynx. And the Lynx is famous for being one of the fastest helicopters, if not the fastest helicopter in the world. And the main reason it's kept around... it's not the main reason it's kept around, but the main reason the Royal Navy has the two is basically in any task group, they will have destroyers, which have a couple of these, and the frigates will have Merlins, and the carrier will have Merlins, and they'll be doing anti-submarine warfare, work. The Merlins are known to have the better sonar, and the Merlins are sort of the better anti-submarine warfare platform. The Lynx are the better general-purpose helicopters. But what Lynx really accelerate in, they really excel in, is... they can be loaded up with their torpedoes and depth charges very quickly. And then if your Merlin is keeping contact but has run out of its own tools tools of submarine destruction, buzz out and go, hello, I'm here. And you are talking about one of the few nations which used to maintain a stockpile of nuclear depth charges. Which we officially don't anymore, and I'm fairly sure we don't anymore, because everyone realised they weren't that helpful. But I think we still maintain, for our helicopters, conventional depth charges that we can use. Seika, how many swordfish do you need to sink a modern carrier? Modern supercarrier. Oh... it depends. If it's got all the defenses working, you're going to need a lot, because you're going to need to write it for it to run out of systems, and all its task force to run out of systems before you get missiles, etc., before you get close. But, if it wasn't fighting, then that's a case of how many torpedoes can you get into it. Hi, Ferrikitten. Dave Harrison, Venezuela, Guatemala, Nicaragua, all much of a muchness in terms of being saber rattlers. Nicaragua, they have slightly more panache about it in my experience of studying them in history. They all have their own turns. Jack Ray, in terms of the F-35Bs in the UK, to explain it, basically it's a common pool of F-35Bs. So basically, you have 13 airframes assigned to Phoenix, to 809 Squadron, 13 assigned to 617. So the Phoenix Squadron and Dam Busters, they're the two squadrons. Royal Navy Squadron to Phoenix, the RF Squadrons to Dam Busters. What happens is they generate their useful aircraft out of that pool. But for when their aircraft go into deep maintenance, it doesn't matter whether you get a Navy airframe back to 809 Squadron or an Air Force airframe back to 809 Squadron to replace the airframe that's gone into maintenance. They are owned by the same pool. So basically it's a case of, we have the same aircraft, they're all kitted out exactly the same. We will have this number of aircraft to operate with, we will have this number of aircraft to operate with, and the pool which we're working from means that when they go into maintenance, we all get what we need. So instead of each of them running a separate pool, they run a combined pool that generates the 2 squadrons. One of them's Navy, one of them's Royal Air Force. And the same with pilot training, etc. It's all sort of jointed up. And each squadron, to an extent, is made up of joint personnel. So there are Navy personnel in the RAF squadron, there are RAF personnel in the Navy squadron. Canvas are very well put, but I would say against a modern 100,000, 110,000 supercarrier, you'd probably need more, with considering the subdivision, etc., within that hull and the many layers of survivability built into it for torpedoes, you'd probably need more than 2 hertz. They can try that, but the trouble is the aircraft are in and the Royal Navy's aircraft are quite often at sea, and so the RAF aircraft. That's the thing. The big deployments for both squadrons keep being carrier-based. So, it's a case of, yes, you own them and their maintenance facility. You own this squadron and their maintenance facility. We own them and their operational facility for the Navy. It's a fun thing. Matt, will the Italians do the same with their F-35 for a share pool? They might well do. I'm not sure. It's going to be up to them. It's going to be up to them and how they feel like running it. A shared pool makes sense when you've got a smaller aircraft buy. You do both services, both the Royal Navy and the fleet, Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force need more F-35Bs. They both need them all. I would say technically the Royal Navy should be operating some region of 54, and I feel the RAF should probably have the same. And you should have probably a combined pool of some region of 120 to 140 to draw from. And that's based off the Royal Navy operating 3 squadrons of 18 and the RAF the same. But they probably go, well, hang on, we'd actually like to operate squadrons of 12, because that's our tradition. That doesn't help. You need 18. Well, then you carry 2 squadrons and 24. I don't object to that, but you know, you could make your life a lot easier administratively by just having it automatically 18 is enough to generate what you need for operations. But, yeah. It's a carrier change. Now, this has got me into discussion recently because there are people in this world who, a short came out recently, which was based on a video I did ages ago about the 1930s. And I said the US Navy doesn't really like small carriers. Well, if anyone wants proof of that, go to a US Navy officer about the 60s and 70s and say, "Sea control ship." And watch them shudder. I'm just saying. Sea control ship. And they will shudder like anything. Well, why don't they like small carriers? It's because they like to carry a lot of aircraft, because they usually want to do it them to do a lot. And that's your basic problem. And every time you go through this debate, if you're the US Navy, and every single carrier generation goes through this debate, they work out what kind of carriers they need to operate. And a lot of people responded with the LHDs they operate, and went, well, you know, they're small carriers. I went, really? Really? They're small carriers. So, the Tara class, which carried 19 Sea Stallions, 26 Sea Knights, and 6 Harrier jump jets. So we're talking 51 aircraft. You're going to include as a small aircraft carrier. And it displaced roughly 44,000 tons fully loaded. I'd say that's in the light fleet carrier category. And we have definitions for all this. So this is usually an escort anti-submarine warfare carrier. It's a single mission focus. This is usually able to do dual missions. Can do two, and I can do 2 missions really well. Maybe can put in a supporting mission. Can do 3 to 4 missions really well. And what is that in terms of missions? That's, remember what I talked about with the 18 aircraft. So if I want 4 aircraft airborne at all times, let's say for a cap, I need to have 4 on alert to replace them on cap if I send the cap off to intercept something. I need to have another 4 below decks that I can bring up to decks to take the alert status. And then I need to be able to cycle through and deal with maintenance, etc. It adds up to 18 aircraft I need to maintain those 4 on station in the air. Well, this is the point. This is what we're talking about. So basically, when you're looking at this one, you're looking at something which has got an 18 and potentially a 12. Maybe it's got 2 18s, but it's going to be bare minimum. This one could be talking up to 3 18s. So it could be up to 54, realistically. But probably not. Probably it's going to be less. Now, the Queen as a class are an interesting one, because people that read a lot into, they say, we will normally be carrying 40 aircraft. That's the problem is the British are not loading them to the maximum in any way, shape or form. They really aren't being loaded to the maximum. Their normal F-wing will be F-35B wing coming up to 36 F-35Bs. And they can then carry up to 24 other rotary aircraft. So that's about 50 or so aircraft. But the thing is, they also have deck parking and other systems available, and they do displace 65,000 tons. So they're in the fleet carrier margin. That's what they're able to operate. They're able to comfortably operate enough to do what the fleet carrier is expected to do. Fords, those are far bigger. So let's go back then to the 1920s and 30s. Well, here is where the treaties do come in. You have a ceiling, theoretically, on your number of aircraft. So theoretically, even though, as we all know, the Lexington class are interesting vessels, and really, really interesting vessels, because officially they are exactly 37,000 tons in standard, which is a very, very interesting interpretation of the limitations that were supposed to be enforced on them. And it's hard to believe they are exactly 37,000 tons in standard. Exactly, perfectly. So they are probably the closest to their period supercarriers. But technically you don't have them in that period. Because pretty much what you have is like fleet carrier to fleet carrier are the same thing in that period. And they are anything which is more than 15,000 tons and has more than 20 aircraft is probably going to be considered some form of fleet carrier. Could it have 20 if you want to even. The E18 is because it gives you 2 spare airframes. So you have got 4 even divisions of 4 to do the cycling through, and you have 2 spare airframes to insert should you lose aircraft or should you need to do heavy maintenance. So this is the scenario. Jacob, you'd have to do a lot of work to make sure the F-35B could land on a frigate. You'd have to do a lot of work on that frigate's deck to make sure it could land on it. But Code 85, you can then extrapolate up to sometimes nowadays. You know, if we consider the Queen as a class with 36. Well, if you had 36 F-35Bs aboard, and you're running a cap, and you're running a strike, you've got 36 aircraft to draw from to generate 8. So you've got 9 To generate 2 divisions of 4, you've got 9 divisions of 4. And basically that gives you 2 on alert as well as 2 in the air. So that's 4 divisions in constant use. So when we start talking about small carriers today, we're talking about these. If I'm talking about small carriers, I'm talking about something which is tiny. I'm talking about Clarke. I'm talking about the Invincible class. I'm talking about their equivalents. Then there are light fleet carriers, which are basically... one of the interesting things is the Charles de Gaulle fits in the light fleet carrier category. It doesn't fit in the full fleet carrier category, because it was made at a time when the first choice dockyard for the French was not owned by a company which the government at the time really got on with, so they went to a smaller dockyard than they probably should have done, and they tried to build it as small as they could do to fit in that dockyard, and that got them the Charles de Gaulle. They're now going with the proper dockyard. They've got the biggest dockyard to build it, and they're going to get a full-size fleet carrier. Wouldn't any earlier class be classed as fleet carrier? Well, the reason I combined the light fleet carrier and the fleet carrier role is that, honestly, at the time, they were all just called fleet carrier. Yeah, they were all just called carriers. And sort of role, but they sort of do still fit. Those roles of light fleet carrier, i.e. this is not a full mission ship, and fleet carrier still exist. But they're just not called it. So let's be honest, there's a reason I've put the Japanese, I think that's Akagi, Lexington, and Courageous here. Because those 3, they all sort of fit in the fleet carrier perspective. They're all larger end. They carry a lot of aircraft. The British carrier, again, carries the least of the 3, but it does carry more aircraft than most of its other siblings does. So its roles and its duties more accord with that of fleet carrier role. But the smaller aircraft, smaller carriers in those categories their roles accord more with light fleet carrier roles. So it's a fun thing, but they're all called fleet carriers. So the roles exist, and the duties exist, but the name and title doesn't exist until you really get to World War II. And basically, you can think of this as, this is what you build to do, so you have a carrier for basic operations. This is what you build so you have something which is a national asset that can allow you to do more. This is a full-strength national asset. And this is what you build when you need to make sure everyone knows what you've built. And one of the interesting things is the US Navy, and this is what really sort of counts them out, is when you look at their LHDs, they fit in this category. And they're sort of the Tarawas, the Wasps, and now the Americas. They fit in this category. And their fleet carriers are, of course, super carriers. So they fit in this category. So they're kind of canted out from the rest of the world. For the rest of the world, these are the carrier capital ships. And these are what they build to assist with operations. For the Americans, these are what they build to assist with operations, and these are the capital ships. Next April Fool's picture suggestion. What if the sea control ship was built? It was built. Have a look at the Spanish carrier. If you look at the Príncipe de Asturias, that is basically the sea control ship. Basically. Again, the Spanish Navy called her the light aircraft carrier. I don't know. I can't remember. Does the Spanish Navy still have an aircraft carrier? That's an interesting question. I've completely forgotten if they still have one. I know they have their LHDs, don't they? They have the one Carlos. That's it. It operates Harriers, so yeah, that's it. They have, but again, that's 27,000 tons. It's definitely a small carrier, and yeah, basically the Spanish Navy have had a lot of their stuff bought by the Australians over recent years. The Australians really liked the boxy Spanish design policy. But it was owned and operated by the US Navy. Oh, good lord. I don't like the idea of producing a video which is going to be used to torment an entire generation of US naval officers. Hang on, do I? No, actually, I quite like the idea of making a video which is going to be used to torment an entire generation of US naval officers. That sounds like fun. The thing is, you wouldn't use an LHD or LHA for escorting merchant vessels, apart from if they're part of your amphibious task group. Knight 681, what did I say about theoreticals? They can be saved to the end. We are discussing what was the reality at this point, the historical reality. So if you want to discuss your theoreticals, please do save them up and we'll discuss them at the end. So, what was the first purpose of carriers? And this is a really interesting one to get into, because if you have carriers earlier on, the earlier you have carriers, the more and more information warfare becomes important. And the thing is, it stays important, but it doesn't become the sole purpose of the aircraft. Spotter aircraft are truly the purest form of information warfare. They are literally there to see the target and provide targeting information. They are not to do anything else themselves. That is what they are there for. But slowly this has evolved into the reconnaissance mission. And yes, I have put a Blackburn up here. I do know, if I didn't put it up there, I knew you would all be very upset with me. But don't worry, it's coming again in this video as well, because, as I've said before, it's not only a spotter reconnaissance aircraft, it is also something else. Now, the interesting thing is, these days, most reconnaissance aircraft, most aircraft which do the reconnaissance role, are normal fighter bombers, which are just fitted with pods, to provide them the capabilities to do the reconnaissance role. They don't tend to have scenarios which sort of limit them. They have to, when you're sort of deploying an aircraft to go on reconnaissance, building a specific reconnaissance aircraft, spotter aircraft these days, will be incredibly wasteful. And this is a big change into your carrier battle group. You have, I would argue again, this is where the Royal Navy can be argued to be at the front. One reason is because of the carriers they had, but also because of the policy they had of supporting operations the other side of the world. And always thinking about that potential war versus Japan, was they wanted to have as fewer airframe types and engine types as possible, so the maintenance and logistics task, which was still going to be gargantuan, was simplified as much as it was possible to. So in this front, the modern carrier, where its multi-role aircraft can do all the various roles, can do the information warfare, the reconnaissance, etc., rather than having specific aircraft for it, is the final evolution. This was always going to be the case, because as big as you grow a carrier, as much as you grow a carrier, it's always a finite amount of space. And yes, there are advantages. You can make an aircraft carrier into a first-rate airfield. All those things which limit you when you're looking at airfield going, was this airfield going to support bombers? Then we don't need to put fighter stuff in because we can save the money. Well, we've got a carrier, we're going to put that stuff in. You're going to put all that stuff in because that carrier is going to be operating for for who knows how many years. It's going to be used all over the world. You don't know what kind of missions you're going to need it for. It could be called on for anything. So you start off with everything in there, and that's another thing which affects size. So again, if you're looking at a global operational carrier, a carrier you're going to go around the world with and do all sorts of operations around the world, you're probably looking at the upper end of this level and this at the least. You can do it with carriers on this level, but it's going to be a constant stress on the crew and the machines and machinery to get it done. Because you are absolutely going to have no space to spare, as big as they are, on this. You're probably not going to have much space to spare on any of these either. If you've ever been on them, a carrier will not strike you as a very open and spacious place. The flight deck maybe. Once you get down into it, though, it's a warren. A maze. A labyrinth. And if you can't read the code on the wall and don't know where you are in the ship, you're going to get lost in it and you might never get out. It's that fun. Also, first rule of navigating around an aircraft carrier or any large ship. Swallow your pride and ask for directions if you get lost. And if you don't want to reveal where you're going because you're not supposed to, because you're on a sneaky beaky mission, ask for something which you know the whereabouts of in relation to where you're going. Good one. The mess. I worry about the people who are playing to the Blackburn. So, reconnaissance aircraft, spotting aircraft. This is a big part of these aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers have always been about the information warfare game. And in many ways, that's the... When we talk about revolutions in military affairs, we often want to talk about the latest weapons or the latest technologies. Well, realistically, they're usually just better ways of doing things than we've done before. Bombing is a better form of artillery. It's longer range, and it tends to allow you to not have to deal with fighting the enemy to actually get there, hopefully. All sorts of things you can base down to their point. But the thing was, when you talk about information gathering, to get the level of information you used to have to send out lots of little ships on their own, and then you couldn't get as much information. You certainly couldn't get someone back easily to your own ship to tell you what they saw with their own eyes. You're basing it on signals, which are sent by flags, which are incredibly limiting. You are now, today, thanks to the information warfare, able to get live imagery from an overwatch, compared to when it used to be someone riding through enemy lines right behind them, usually a couple of people on horseback. Again, this was a role my family used to quite enjoy doing. Quite often walking in certain terrains rather than horseback. And they go and see what the enemy was doing, and then someone gets sent back. They might go solo back to give the information back to the commander, and then they might return to gather more information. And by the time they returned on their own, their first party might have moved, so they didn't have to find them and find where they've gone. And sometimes you have a relay of people, but they have to be careful so they don't get spotted going to the same spot. It's great fun. Whereas nowadays you mostly use a satellite system, but sometimes even satellites don't provide you with up-to-date information. Or you'd have to retask a satellite, and they know that. And because of the satellite overflights, they are using things like huge barrels of oil that they set on fire, smoke pots, to do smoke obscuration. Then you've got to use radar and all sorts of things. And the more complicated they make it, the more limited number of satellites you can use, because not all of your satellites up there are your best systems. Well, they need the aircraft to go. And those in future might be uncrewed, which might give you another layer of expendability, to be honest. Because let's be honest, that's what uncrewed assets really give modern nations. If you lose a person, you have to write a letter home and deal with 24 hours of press, at least, about why was this person lost, what were you doing, all those things. If, on the other hand, you... how to put this politely? If, on the other hand, you lose a machine, you just have to write a check. The only people who are going to be upset with you are going to be the Treasury. And they don't tend to demand funerals. Well, other than for you for spending their money. And yes, there's all sorts of disabling satellite things, etc. and other systems they can do these days. One message: a drone can be used in emergency to intercept a missile if it is self-without of missiles to protect the ship full of people. Yeah, you can fly it in front of them. There was a what was it? There was a book I read a few years ago which had the British A operating F-18s because they'd had a Cadabar carrier, and B, they were the second line aircraft. And the guy who was about, well, he'd lost his wife in the war because the AI took control of her F-18 and shoved that in the way of the incoming missiles to protect the carrier. And I always thought, reading that, well, you've got AI advanced enough that you're allowing it to take control of your own combat aircraft. But you haven't got uncrewed aircraft it can control? That seems a bit of a strange scenario. Blanca, this chat has reminded me of sometimes someone called the QEs as escorts carriers because they're using the Ford as a benchmark for carriers. Yeah, well, there is a big flaw in that scenario, because the reason the Americans are called super carriers is because they can do more than you expect a fleet carrier to do. Peter, I'm not getting into Knight's discussion on the tonnage at the moment because, as I said, it's the other questions afterwards. But I'm thinking there's also HMS Eagle. There's, as you put it, HMS Furious, and there's already plans in that period for larger ships. That's the thing. There was always plans for larger ships. Hermes was supposed to be a test bed. And the model for the Lexingtons was designed and announced in March 1922. And when it was announced in March 1922, they had a full wooden-built mock-up of the design of how they were going to change it. So that means they've been planning it for quite a while by the time you get to 1922. Well, yeah, no, I can't be honest, but again, there were all sorts of issues with that book. It was, let's put it this way. I don't have a problem with anyone writing science fiction, I really don't. I don't have a problem with anyone writing anything as a story, they don't have to have lived it. I do request that if they haven't lived it, they go off and do the research into it. That's my one request, because otherwise it can be really, really annoying for when people like me are reading it and going, but that's not how the systems work. It takes us straight out of the story. So, then we have air defense at sea. Now, I have to say, this took a while to come of age. It really did. Because carriers having fighters is one thing. For a while, aircraft are slow enough that you can see the aircraft coming and you can launch the carriers from your fighter, which is why from your carrier you launch the fighters from your fighters from your carrier, which is why in the early 1920s and up to sort of the mid 1920s, you've got a real emphasis being placed on speed of climb. You have aircraft like the Fairey Flycatcher here, which is probably in its period, and I know someone's going to bring up the various American equivalents and the Japanese equivalents, but I would argue the Flycatcher is probably the best for its period. Why? Because its climb rate actually comes into play and actually works, and combined with its maneuverability and ability to basically take off from a postage stamp, meant that it could get airborne very quickly, get to the height it needed to intercept incredibly quickly, and dive down on the enemy strike aircraft. The trouble is, the period for which the fighters are fast enough to do that, and yet the bombers are not fast enough to have got past them and attack the air carrier and the other ships, is measured in moments. It truly is. Measured in moments. And that's an interesting scenario to think about. Because after that, you then get the scenario of, well, if we have enough space and we have enough ships out, and we can see an enemy coming, what matters is who can launch the most fighters. And that's if you're the Americans and Japanese, because you're thinking about fighting in the wide open Pacific. Maybe the Atlantic, but usually that's just a wargaming exercise, not an actual exercise. When they do actual exercises, they're against the Japanese. Wargaming, the British are included, because the British are probably the most scary option they could potentially have, because, again, it's 1920s and 1930s. The British and Americans are the only peer nations in the world when it comes to naval power. Now, with all of this put in, and all this organised, the US have pushed forward, especially post-World War II. And during World War II, prior to it, you have radar sort of starting to develop. The British have gone up with the cap system. The Americans are slowly starting to turn to the cap system as they are realizing, hang on, it doesn't matter how many fighters we launch, how quick we launch them. We need to have aircraft airborne to have any chance of doing an intercept. And that's where the British, already starting down the road of fighter control, has already begun. And before war begins, and then war accelerates the British program. And the Americans very much have their own ideas in place, and they have people like FAC, etc., pushing those ideas. But they aren't really taken on board until they are, A, seeing what the British are doing in Mediterranean, and B, especially when they start doing the joint operations between Saratoga and what was named for the operations USS Robin, but of course was HMS Victorious. Where pretty much what they decided they'd do is, Saratoga, you are now the strike carrier, you are loaded with everyone's strike aircraft. British and American. Victorious, you are now the air defense carrier, and you're going to take all the fighters. And you're going to do the air defense coordination. And so, pretty much that's how they run those operations. And that's how the Americans go, you know what, this system really works, the British are doing. Yeah, it maintains, it's hard going, it maintains aircraft 24 hours a day. Really? Yes, really. It happens. Post-war, we have a constant development then of what you're going to do in terms of your fighters. And you probably have the best fighter of all time for its period is the F-14. Now, don't get me wrong, the F-18F and all the other things, they're very good aircraft. They are very good aircraft, but they are a fusion of the fighter with the strike aircraft. And at a certain point, the strike aircraft dominates the fighter. Mostly because these days, fighting is not about fighting. If you think about it, the modern dogfight is not a fighter on fighter, it's missile on fighter. With the fighter trying to avoid the missile which is coming for it by using chaff and maneuvers, and flares and ECM. The dogfight has moved on from being a pilot on pilot, fighter on fighter scenario to being who has the most powerful radar or the most information about where the opponent is at the longest range without revealing their position, and then launching your missiles at the longest possible range that they can do a kill at, and those missiles will then take out the enemy aircraft. And yes, you go away and get the award after the missiles won the dogfight. As the pilot. And it's who can get that shot in first. The 14 was the beginning of that. It was the beginning of that. They had the Phoenix missile, and everything was designed for a long range attack. These days, that's so much the case of things that when we start talking about aircraft, we're going, oh, which aircraft will win against which in a dogfight? You're already talking the wrong question. You're asking the wrong question. It's not a dogfight, it's a missile fight. It's a long-range engagement. Now, Carl has asked the question of when can we have a bilge pumps? As I've said repeatedly, when all of us are free again, the bilge pumps will start up again. Probably soon, I'm hoping. Look, I'm at the point where we could be finally starting doing the final paperwork for the move in the next 2 weeks. Then we hopefully move. At some point, if everything goes to plan, in the next couple of weeks, we also announce the next shipshape trip and all the ship stuff from shipshape coming out. The lovely, finally here, challenge coins have arrived. We have a meeting tomorrow at 1300 hours to discuss that. All four of us online discussing that and going through it. And then, once we've done that and sorted all those things out, bilge pumps will be back, and I will start organising that. But I have... Don't take this the wrong way. Drac and Jamie are both very busy, and I'm very busy, and I'm the one who managed to get the role of being the organiser, because, as Drac so helpfully puts it, I'm the tank in our little D&D group. I'm the one that's slightly more organised and slightly methodical. Slightly more, and slightly more. Those margins are very narrow, and I swear he plays them up to get out of it. I swear. But this means that when I am spending my time, and so far this week, I have spent, and this is, again, I swear, I may be adding to the ear issue, because it might be the amount of time I spent on the phone this week. I have spent on average of 3 hours every single day on the phone, sorting out the frigging move with the bank, the financiers, the lawyers, all 4 sets of lawyers, the estate agents. And they're all lovely people, but it all takes time. And that is actually more than 12 hours of my life. It's about 15 hours of my life gone this week on that. Yeah. So that's it. Okay, it will come back. But it will come back when I'm through this, and keep asking the questions. It does remind me it's wanted back. But honestly, it's not going to accelerate it. Saying you'd like it back soon, that's one thing. Keep asking questions. Frankly, it's a bit case of... It's almost a case of... I would want it back. I want it back. I like talking to my friends. It's a great stress relief to actually get time to talk to my friends. I haven't managed to talk to them in months. But yeah. No, it's basically it's going to be as soon as we can. How that's enough. Wait, it's not like Top Gun 2? Hollywood lied? Yeah, they always lie. In the nicest way, there was a period of overlap in about the 60s and 70s when you had both missiles and guns, and you had missile engagements, but you also had dogfighting. As you go through the 80s, dogfighting becomes less and less of a common scenario. Because, again, if I'm in this and I engage with cannon, or if we go back to the F-35B, if I'm engaging with cannon in the F-35B, I need it because that scenario might happen. But if I'm actually engaging with it, then, well, there have been problems have happened. And probably I'm carrying that cannon, most likely if I'm using it on things like drones and small systems like that, because it saves money and that's going to be a closer range intercept. Or balloons, and it's far better to be fitted with it than to not have it. But if I'm engaging in air-to-air battle, I want to be using missiles. I want to be doing it a long way away from me, because it's safer for me. If I had the suitcase of cash, I'd be doing that. So, here now go, we have Blackburn Baffins finally in here. I thought this was getting, you know, far too Blackburn heavy. I thought the Baffin should come in. And it's from 1932, and it's quite a cute aircraft, and it is only retired in 1941. It serves with the fleet, with the Royal New Zealand Air Force for many, many years. And it originally had the original Bristol Pegasus engine. The Ripon, its predecessor, had the Napier Lion water-cooled inline engine. The Bristol Pegasus was, of course, air-cooled radial. At that point, the Pegasus only had 545, or is it 54? 545 horsepower. Now, there's an interesting discussion here with Strike. Your range, your ability to reach out and intercept. And again, this is the thing with carriers. And again, it takes me back to the US doctrine scenario, but a lot of them is, your ability is to strike here, hit a target. Maybe it's 100, 200 miles from your carrier. In the 1920s. Turn to your carrier. 20 knots speed of progress. Strike over here later. And you can do that within a day. You can hit targets which may be 700 miles apart within a 24-hour period. That's a dilemma for me to deal with. Actually, that could be within a 14 to 15-hour period. 24-hour period, I could have struck 3 targets over a gap of 400 plus 200. Of 800 and 900 miles. Modern day carriers, which can go a lot faster, you can probably add their range of movement to 600 to 700 miles within that scenario, and you can add the strike range of aircraft, considering their speed and capability, to up to 1,000 nautical miles. So you could be striking targets over a distance of 3,000 nautical miles distance. Now, interesting question below from Leslie. Does not stealth reduce the missile engagement range? This is the interesting factor. At the most of this time, currently, most stealth aircraft, when we're looking at them, we're talking about F-35s, we're talking about F-22s. Yes, the Russians have And the Chinese have aircraft that they certainly claim are stealth aircraft, but they have some interesting compromises in them, and they haven't actually produced a lot of them. There aren't a lot of them up at the moment. They could grow, they could have more, but honestly, the Russians at the current time are focusing on the Ukrainian war and supplying weapons for that, so I don't expect any of their high-end weapons to really be getting the funding they need to expand them at the moment. That's not their priority. And before anyone starts going back, oh, that's not saying they can't do it. I'm just saying I don't think it's their priority at the moment with all the rest they've got going on. It could be their priority, but then that means that's money which is not going towards the Ukraine war, and frankly, they need all the money they can going to that front at the moment. Because one of the things was their military was not, I would argue, designed necessarily around a long-term conflict. And they're having to rebuild that capability. I'd say, if anyone's disagreeing with that, have a look at the logistics issues they've had. They are designed, their military is not has not been built around this. I don't think anyone's military has in the world at the moment. The Americans are probably the closest with their layers of logistics, but that's a function of size, not a function necessarily of sensible leadership from the centre. So that's a problem for everyone. I'm not picking on the Russians when I say that. I'm saying no one really has that capability, and the Russians are having to rebuild that capability while in the middle of a war. And that's going to take a lot of their funding. When it comes to the Chinese, their stealth aircraft, the Chinese are very bright and capable, so should never be discounted. But saying that, we're also dealing with a system which has had its own issues recently in recent years with rooting out corruption and dealing with problems. And when you've got scenarios like your ballistic missile systems have not been properly built and installed, and the money has been redirected elsewhere, that we would expect to be one of the more closely scrutinized programs. It makes you worry about the other programs. Now, this is not to say that our own programs are in any way, shape, or form perfect. But the thing is, just because you hear more often about the faults in our programs, because of the way the press and etc. systems run in the West, doesn't mean the other nations don't run into their own issues. So you couple those issues with what we know, and it becomes an issue. I'd say the biggest problem for Western stealth aircraft is the way that goalposts keep getting moved. The F-35 is a great example on a project. It starts out with a mission to do one thing, and then they keep adding on stuff to it like it's a Christmas tree. And yes, of course, it's cost balloons and it's cost balloons and everything else around it balloons, because if you keep adding criteria of things you want it to do onto it, it's going to make it. If every time someone has a new idea about where future of warfare is going to go, and you go, this aircraft is going to have to be able to do that as well, you're adding on to the expense. And there is a difference between stealth and stealth in terms of the level of stealthiness. Reliable jet engines, yeah, they're an issue. Admittedly, for the Russians, this was the classic example of why you don't... In a nicest way, the thing was, if they won quickly in Ukraine, it was all sorted. If it ran on a long time, they had a lot of problems. Their engine turbines... They got cut off from those in 2008. They got cut off from all these things, and they hadn't done much about it till and then 2014. They got cut off from those in 2014. I mean, 2008. This has been roughly 8 years, and then in 2022 they got a cut off from other imports of them, and it's a case of, oh, for goodness sake, you've had 8 years, but no, they were presuming on a quick war. And let's be honest, that's nothing. That is not unusual. Militaries, governments assuming that a war is going to be over quickly and they're going to win within days or hours is nothing unusual. Sadly enough, it's a common refrain through history that militaries think they're going to win a war and it's going to be glorious quickly, or governments think they are. That's the information they read. The reality becomes very different very quickly. Question, have I had pink tablets in front of you all? Because I'm supposed to have taken these at a certain point today. Because I've got to take these every 4 hours and these every 4 hours. I took these at roughly 4 o'clock, so I should have taken them at roughly 8. And I took these at 6 o'clock, so I should take them at 10, and they are supposed to be separated by a good chunk of time. So, question, did I forget to take my medication? Or rather, my ibuprofen and my Lemsip? Take care, night Dave Harrison. Don't think so. Gonna just check if there's anyone else who's seen me use them. Nice that everyone is usually watching me fairly closely. Okay. Did not see any tablets being taken. Okay, thank you. Right then, well, let's take these. I hate ibuprofen. Okay. Well, the thing is, I always love it because the doctors always tell you, you have this tight prescription of, you should take this, this, this. And then the Navy medics I've ever worked with, and Navy nurses especially, have basically gone, so what you do is you open the mouth, you take a handful of painkillers, paracetamol, ibuprofen, mix them all in, and you chuck at the mouth, and whatever goes in the mouth is the right amount to take. I mean, this is why they have smartphone app field cases. No. Goodness gracious me. Okay, well, I've just taken them, so therefore I've done, and I'm not. If I start trying to take these at 10 o'clock, if I'm still live, tell me off, because it's got to be at least an hour's separation between two. So I can't take these now before 10:30. Basically, they're supposed to overlap every 4 hour, every sort of. They're supposed to be theoretically a 2-hour gap between them, and it's every 4 hours for each of them through the day for the next 2 days, and see if that works on my ear. That's fun. If that didn't work, I get antibiotics for the ear. Yay. Tomorrow I'm climbing ladders up the side of the house, and I've got a dodgy ear. Yay. Ugh. Right. So strike. It's about a range thing. Now, again, we've got all sorts of discussions going on about the various restrictions going on, or scenarios. Yeah, that's too contemporary politics. Calvin Gasberg. We're talking about procurement here and strike. And stealth aircraft came up as a legitimate question, so yes, I got into full stealth discussion. And there is a difference also between the interface. You have to remember, one of the problems that comes up with nations is some nations bluff with their components by claiming they're better than they are, and some bluff by not saying how good they are. So some nations inflate, some nations deflate their capabilities. Historically, Good examples of nations which tend to deflate their capabilities in public documents are most democratic regimes. Mostly they tend to deflate them because if they fail to live up to them, they suffer consequences in terms of the politics. Where if they do better, they tend to secure their position. If they don't do as well, then they tend to not lose their position. Most authoritarian governments tend to inflate their capabilities because that's how they show how powerful and great they are. And as they tend to control all forms of communication and information transfer, they then, when it turns out their systems aren't as good, then they just cover it up. Excellent, Ronan, you can still see. Be careful. Then we have anti-submarine warfare. Now, this is something which has actually been around since World War One. But trying to find an aircraft, a picture of an aircraft carrying a 100-pound bomb, which is what they used to use, 100-pound bombs, for anti-submarine warfare, proved frigging impossible. Now, the thing is, anti-submarine warfare has been a capability for a long time. It used to be about dealing with submarines when they were on the surface, because, as I've said before, submarines in World War I and World War II are submersible torpedo boats. They are not submarines. The amount of times I had talked to people that go, well, you know, they could proceed underwater and attack here and attack there, and you're going, no, they couldn't. Underwater, they can do 7 knots. Part of the reason why the Royal Navy didn't really have much trouble dealing with the U-boats getting out of the Mediterranean was because their underwater speed was 7 knots, and the gap from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean usually is 7 knots. Is often 7 knots going in the other direction. So that boat ain't going anywhere underwater. Unless it's on the surface, in which case if it's on the surface going through the Straits of Gibraltar, good luck to it, it's going to need it. Now, in contrast, if we consider some of the submarines of the Regia Marina, a good example being the Ardua class, they could do 7.5 knots submerged. The Accio class, 7.7 knots submerged. That was pretty much the end of the 600 series. And when you start going through some of the other submarines, what should we go for? Calvi class, they're quite cool. They could do 7.4 knots submerged. Anyone would think, and then the Fokker class could do 7.4 knots submerged. The Pietro Mecca, which was one of their better submarines, honestly, could do 8.5 knots submerged. The Italians had studied the Straits of Gibraltar, and they knew they couldn't get in and out if they could only do 7 knots. So you don't really get true submarines. Well, there are many who claim the Type 21s, etc., of the German Navy post at the end of World War II are certainly heading that direction. They are. When you've got a submarine that can go can go as fast underwater as it can go above water, if it wants to, That's pretty much a submarine. And when it's got a submarine which is as happy below water as it is above water, then you've got a submarine. If it's mutually unhappy in both scenarios, equally unhappy in both scenarios, I don't think that qualifies. So it's equally happy in both scenarios. Usually you're talking proper submarines once you get to about the 60s. Late 50s, early 60s. And especially nuclear submarines. And modern SSKs are most certainly in that category. Tony Furker, when do they stop using 100-pound bombs? That's an interesting question to ask, Tanif. That is truly an interesting question, because when do they officially stop using them versus when do they stop carrying them and using them is a question like, when did the Royal Navy stop using the swordfish on combat operations? You have an answer, and then you have an operations report. And, yeah, 7 knots. Again, the thing is, the Italians built it so their subs could maintain that speed for sufficient time to get them through the straits. That was their criteria. The German U-boats weren't necessarily able to do that unless the current was with them and reduced current that day, and they were able to keep it up. And remember, they're going to be significantly slowed down. So even if it's running at its lightest, which is a 4-knot current. So if it's a 4-knot current, they've got 3 knots of progress. If that current stretches up, or if their battery is not holding full charge, they could end up having to surface halfway through. There is a reason why HMS Nelson, there is a discussion, she wasn't credited with it, but she's also got a story about being used as an anti-submarine warfare vessel. The 2 battleships which did anti-submarine warfare operations in their time were probably Dreadnought and Nelson. And Nelson's anti-warfare scenario was, we have picked up a submarine out there on the surface. We have? It's surfaced. Okay. We've got radar-guided gunnery. 16-inch guns. Engage. Before any aircraft could go to it. And it was sitting in Gibraltar. And then you have, later on, aircraft come along like the Viking here. Now, the Viking is an absolutely extraordinary aircraft, of course, magnetic anomaly detector on time. And what I do love about some of these aircraft and some of these capabilities is if you listen to some submariners, they'll honestly tell you that these days, anti-submarine warfare aircraft are pointless. They can't detect us. They can't detect us. You go, so what's the thing that scares you most? Enemy submarines, of course. What usually finds you to send in the submarines? Well, all sorts of things might find us. It's usually, of course, the anti-submarine warfare aircraft. But honestly, the anti-submarine warfare aircraft are quite a lethal asset on their own. What I would say is you need more of them than you think. You always need more of them than you think. And I would say the loss of aircraft like the Viking from carrier air groups has been probably one of the biggest losses, other than aircraft like the Intruder, which did truly long-range strikes. The Viking is an asset which you've replaced with helicopters, but helicopters do not have the same range and same scope. And the thing is, helicopters are a great anti-submarine warfare tool for prosecuting an enemy submarine. They're great for dipping their sonar in, for dropping sonar buoys, laying down an area and watching and doing basically a aerial version of surge and drift. That's what they're doing, of charging, then drifting with all sort of their sonar buoy as much as they can, and then charging off to another area. Now, Now, the thing is, that's perfectly capable, but the thing about the MAD, the magnetic anomaly detector, and there's been an interesting question from Jacob, but I said, they are useful. They are a system which has been around. They basically are used to detect the variations in the Earth's magnetic field. And they do that, and they're using information which, remember, was first gathered years ago to work out what was going to affect the performance of torpedoes. Remember when you have magnetic torpedoes which are detonated by the magnetic influence of a ship, i.e. when they pass underneath it, hopefully, and they reach the point of maximum magnetic strength for the ship, which it should be right underneath it, they go boom to break its back. But then you degauss it. You maybe have cables, etc. Also things to try and reduce its electromagnetic field, its magnetic field. Well, magnetic anomaly detector is basically that, but it's a airborne version that it can be used by helicopters. It can be used by aircraft. It's usually mounted on the rear of the aircraft. It is on the P3C. It's a fair number of aircraft which use them, and they can be used for survey operations. And basically, they are detecting the differences created in the Earth's magnetic field by a submarine. So basically, this thing sticking out the back of the aircraft. No, the Viking is not going to the toilet in the air. No, that's not the aerial refueling boom. Nope. That's the magnetic anomaly detector. Hello, Thomas. It's like asking when did the last Englishman take a longbow to war. Most would say in the medieval period, whereas others know it was 1944. There's some rumours about more recent conflicts than 1944. And yeah, they have other uses. They're used for geophysical survey and mining and all those things to sort of... this is why there's a lot of commercial data which can be used by the militaries when they're putting together systems like this. And yeah, it's used, it's useful. It's... In fact, honestly, above Sea State 5... MAD may be the only method which you can reliably detect a submarine. It cannot give you perfect reading, and it's not going to give you perfect reading, but it's going to probably tell you if something's there. And sometimes that something is going to be a geophysical structure, sometimes that's going to be a submarine. Jacob, no bow for Falklands. That's disappointing. I'm not getting into discussing of longbows and recent wars. That is an entire video of mystery and according to rumours. And some of those rumours are more interesting than others. Some of those rumours get a lot weirder. So, then we have operational support air warfare. Now, remember I was talking about the problem of what happens if you're trying to see aircraft coming in? How do you detect aircraft with long enough range to launch? Well, the Royal Navy in the 1920s had an answer to that. Stick up a Blackburn or an Avro Bison. It's got lookouts in it. It's got visual people. They will look out and see, and they'll give the warning. Because again, the trouble is the curvature of the Earth. You can't see around it. So you go up and you look around it, and that expands your range of view. Now, the trouble with visual identification is there is cloud and all those other annoying things. But it still helps. It still helps with you getting your fighters up in time. Make sure, geological structures don't tend to move at 30 knots. Yes, but a submarine might be just sitting there. Because sometimes the submarines sit there and power down as low as they can. They often, submarines will often try and hide near wrecks and geological structures because you know they exist. So when you get that reading, you presume, oh, that's just that. Again, your enemy it's a cat and mouse game, and you're never sure who's the cat and who's the mouse in anti-submarine warfare. Now, this has evolved over time as we've developed radar, and of course we've taken radar up with us, and the first radar-borne aircraft were interesting. There are accounts of people tampering with ASV, that's anti-surface radar, on swordfish, to try and use them for AEW. It's interesting because without a without a proper indication system, that is a plan position indicator system. Sort of when you have the radar and center display and you have that, you don't really get necessarily enough information for that to really work. But they were trying. They had ideas. They were trying. Now, these days, you've got roughly two main systems in terms of naval aviation. You've got the Hawkeye, which is your carrier-based aircraft version, and, well, how do I put this politely? The Chinese version of Hawkeye, which looks incredibly similar to Hawkeye, up to including having a four-tail solution. The radome looks very similar structure, twin turboprop aircraft, which is why it's not up there. So you have the Hawkeye and the honestly not a Hawkeye. And you have Merlin, helicopter-based system, Crow's Nest. Now, there are many interesting discussions about the pros and cons of these systems, and let's be honest, the Hawkeye is probably the better early warning system. But if you don't have a carrier that's operating Cadabar aircraft and has the space for the Hawkeye, then that doesn't mean you shouldn't want to have anything. Because again, this is about having a full service capability. If you have airborne early warning, you have a carrier capability which can provide you with another underpinning of global reach, because you can expand the eyes of the fleet, the defense and security fleet, that much further. It's not the same as the Hawkeye provides, but it's still better to have it than to have nothing. Like I said, they simply use it to check the correctness of their own design. Look, this is one of the things that annoys me, because I know the Chinese. I've had enough students come through King's, etc., and other places I've taught in. They are very smart and very capable people. Sometimes I look at the systems they choose and I just go, they weren't ordered to develop an airborne early warning system. They were ordered to develop that because that works, and they have therefore had to copy that. They could have developed their own thing. Camels are also cute, albeit, yeah, well, the Camels are cute, and, yeah, using them as airborne early warning is an interesting scenario which we won't get into. Someone needs to paint a Blackburn black with an added mad detector. Why would you do that to a mad detector? But the thing is, airborne early warning aircraft are really worth their weight in gold. They truly are. One interesting discussions which the British had a few years ago, which I think could have led to something truly interesting. This was when they were working on the Sea King, but also would have had consequences for the Merlin. Was that they were planning on using their medium aircraft like the Merlin as a common pool, or like the Merlin Sea King as a common pool, and they'd have basically a containerized system which could be slotted in the stern through up the stern ramp, which could turn them into an airborne early warning aircraft, could turn them into a ASW aircraft, could turn them into a troop transport. And so you would have the pool of airframes on your carrier or in your force, and they could all be alternated by just sticking in this container. And what you'd have is you'd carry a pool of containers on your carrier. So let's say you took 24 Merlins with you on your on the Queen Elizabeth class, and your 36 F-35s. And you've got your full group of aircraft, okay? You've got that full capability. Let's say you go for that. You really have rammed the ship full of everything you can fit into it. You've got no space for anything at all. You've got deck parking, a lot going on. What you do to treat that as is you treat that as a pool of 24 airframes from your Merlins. And you might carry with you, let's say, 36 of the ASW containers. So if you have any problems with the system on a helicopter, you pull out the system, you put in another system, and you take that system off, and you've still got that helicopter able to, the airframe's able to go and work. If it's the airframe, you've got a problem. If it's the ASW capabilities, you can just pull out, put a new system in. If it is the airframe that's the problem, well, you can turn around. Are we using all our troop transport configure ones at the moment? Nope. Okay, pull out that troop transport one from that one. Stick in the anti-submarine warfare. We've now got it. And it turns it into a common pool. Now, it wasn't worked on. It wasn't developed. It was a very interesting idea, but it never really got off the ground. There was some funding put in, there was some development put into it, but not much happened. Have you seen the Wellington Ring magnetic anomaly detector? That is quite a cool system, let's be honest. And that was to demonstrate electronic magnetic mines. Yeah. They tried to make it other things. So, yeah, you know, there were options there. Which would have actually... I myself, if they pulled that off with the Merlin system and they made it all a containerized system, I'd then be probably sitting here going, that's the better airborne early warning system. That is the better system for a carrier to be operating. And you'd probably also have a scenario going on with the US Navy where they'd have adopted something similar to that system, and they'd have some pods for some of their helicopters in, which had airborne early warning configuration, because then they could expand their AEW capability should they need to in operations. They probably still had the Hawkeyes, but if they need to, if they got into a situation where they went, we really need to cover all the threat axes, we really need to have another 4 airframes we can generate for airborne early warning. Okay. Take 4 of the helicopters, reconfigure them. And 4 hours later, let's say, they'd be reconfigured into airborne early warning. I'd like to see the main some modern carrier. There are some really good pictures of the hangar of the Queen Elizabeth class out, and you can see a lot on there. And one of the things you realise quite quickly is that the crane can get everywhere. The crane can get everywhere. As it needs to. But also you start to realise that the... hangar is used for a lot more than just the aircraft. I'm going to grab an image of the UK Defence Journal, I think. I've got one somewhere. And by the way, if you haven't looked at it yet, the UK Defence Journal is a great website. It's an absolutely amazing website with all sorts of details on it. And it's always worth a look. And they really do post a lot of pictures. Although these ones they've got off the Royal Navy site. Right, so if I go to image free and I browse and add in that one, and image 6 and I browse and add in that one, wow, that's kind of massive. And I do that, and that. There you go. So as you can see, you've got two images. They were published by the Royal Navy, so I have no qualms, and they were published first 2021, so that's quite a long time ago. So operational security and all these things are well covered by that. And you can see that these hangars are absolutely stock full of supplies and the aircraft. Now, if you put the supplies through the carrier instead and on supply ships, so you have all of that space for aircraft, you can of course accommodate more aircraft. But this is one of the reasons why you have a large hangar, because for missions when you don't need to take the maximum number of aircraft, or maybe what you're operating normally in, you will probably have other options. And the other options in this case are we are bringing other components and other things with us. But this is what you're talking about in terms of modern carrier. You're also talking these aircraft are on what I would call spacious parking. They've got a lot of clear space between them. They've got a lot of space to maintain things between them, a lot of capability space. It's also interesting when you start looking at this picture, especially what I'm calling image 6. If we take that one up to here, get rid of that one for a second. If you look at the number of aircraft with bags, how many have we got? We've got 3. So we have got 3 of the Crow's Nest Merlins sitting there. They're 3 of their radar bags. Provide airborne early warning. There is probably, if they're running a sensible operation, which they more likely were, a 4th one sitting around. And that might be the very aircraft behind. If we notice, on all the 3 helicopters in front that we can see with the bags, we can see their port side, their left. That one we can only see the starboard of it. It's painted a similar colour, but we can infer it's possibly the 4th one. And you can see the F-35Bs up there. Well, we take this down again. And we bring out this. So they match up. and we do this to expand it out, you can see from the F-35B end, you can see all the F-35B stored underneath there. And again, you can see how they're being stacked and organised, how they're being arranged in the hangar, and what space they have available. And also the sheer amount of stores and supplies being moved around them. Again, that's quite spacious, but there are a lot of tie-down points on that carrier deck. And that's one of the key things to have in there. The maintenance facilities are tie-down data points, are things to allow you to do the maintenance in various configurations. And I do love that there are so many people who like to produce various maps of this is how this hangar space can be used in theory, and where the aircraft can be stored. Now, they are right to some extent, but I was thinking they're wrong. You need an iron brew store. I do need an iron brew store. How do you maneuver planes, all this stuff around? Carefully. It's also used for basketball games in US carriers, yes, but usually that's when the aircraft are not in the hangar. The pubs are very popular. The pubs on the carriers are very popular. Next we have operational support electronic warfare. Now this is something... Jammers are relatively new. When we think of aerial jammers, they are relatively new. Because you both have electronic warfare and then you have means of obscuring electronic warfare. It's not new to conflict. The idea of denying information to your opponent by obfuscation and blocking their view, that's nothing new. And with electronic warfare, this is an E-18G Growler. This is the most underrated aircraft in the US military. Or rather, it's the most undersold one. The Super Growler is probably the scariest thing, I would argue, since the Cretaceous period. Not the F-22. Not the Buff. Not the B-2. Because these can go into somewhere and are specifically designed to go in and knock out an air defense network. So then they open you up to every aircraft to come in, not just those which might be stealthed or protected or able to do very low level flying. These are what will knock back your defenses, and this is part of a constant war. So upgrading these is a constant struggle to keep them ahead of the game. And upgrading to counter these is a constant struggle. These are probably some of the most scary aircraft you can hear in an air group. Because everything else is designed in a way to avoid or obfuscate or undermine your air defense network. These are designed to obliterate an air defense network. That is a different capability. So, some aircraft planes get used more than others, but just by where they're stored. Not really. They tend to circulate around. Again, remember what I said about some being in the air, some being... So that was when they were all down there. When they're being circulated around and they're on deck. And some days you will have helicopters and things positioned on deck. And you'll have plenty of space in there. Sometimes you won't have helicopters positioned on deck, and you won't have aircraft positioned on deck, and then it'll be very tightly packed in there. Sorry, cute little ram turbines at the front of the electronic warfare pods. Yes, they do provide them with a little bit of extra power. It's always nice. Well, there's just been an interesting question, which has just been asked me, of what are rotor blades made of? And, honestly, my first instinct was to say, I'm not going to get into this because I'm sure it's not a publicly discussed material for the latest aircraft. But I did a check just to make sure, and thank you, Science Museum, sciencemuseumgroup.org.uk. They have a cross-section from the tip section of EH-101 helicopter rotor blade, which they list the capabilities, or the materials are making it. Basically, it is a mixture of titanium, Nomex aramid honeycomb, glass and carbon fiber, and an epoxy resin. And if you want to go and find that, I presume it's on display somewhere in the Science Museum. But that was the blade as designed and used in 1997. So by now, I think they've had some upgrades. EA6B Prowler was a nice plane. Oh, it was. It was a nice plane. Brownline, I couldn't be wrong, but aren't the carriers always... Let's put it this way. The trouble is the British have had the carriers come into service, and someone hasn't been funding the Royal Fleet Auxiliary properly. So whilst they have the ships, they don't necessarily have the crews available, and specifically the fast supply ships to support the carriers, they've only just ordered recently. So, in typical British fashion, it's a fudge job. It's kind of like, oh yeah, well, we'll only get 6 destroyers because it's never going to be a high enough threat scenario that we're going to need more than 2 destroyers per carrier group, and we won't ever be operating 2 carrier groups at the same time. That'll never happen. So instead of getting the 12 we originally planned, or the 9 we originally ordered, or the 8 we signed contracts for, we're only going to get 6. Sorry, rant. And here's the thing, for anyone's watching this who's wondering about this. The ships, as they get built, get cheaper. The reason they get cheaper is A, you get more experience of building them. B, the research and development costs are spread over more units, so the individual ship price goes down. And the actual price to actually build the ship goes down even more. So the 6 that were cancelled of the Type 45s would have been the 6 cheapest vessels. And broadly speaking, that programme, which is £6 billion for 6 vessels, would have been £8.4 billion for 12. Which would have made the cost, instead of £1 billion per unit, £700 million per unit. And could have theoretically been lower, because it could have been £300 million per each one, which would mean it's £7.8 million. £7.8 billion, which is still a lot of money, but that then works out at £650 million per unit once you spread the cost out, and you have 12 vessels. Officially, the EF-10 Skyknight is the USN's first... Well, I'd say it's the first USN's purpose-built electronic warfare carrier aircraft. The EA-6B, as you're right, is its replacement, and the E-18G Super Growler, technically called the Super Growler. Let's be honest, that's one of the coolest names you've ever heard for an aircraft. Super Growler is the replacement for the Prowler. Well, the idea was the British would always have two destroyers, and the original idea, the British task group idea, was 3 destroyers per carrier, and at least 3 carriers, and at least 3 to 4 frigates per carrier. That's now gone down to 2 destroyers, 2 frigates, and only 2 carriers. Yeah, Knights of Green we were never getting a class of 48. We couldn't hold 120. We could never crew them all, but yeah. Only the crew for 4.5. We have slightly more than the crew for 4.5 of them. Not much more, but slightly more. Yeah. Safford, don't take this the wrong way, but I am saying this with all due love and respect for Canada, for Britain, and for all sorts of countries involved. But as much as I get annoyed by the British government in their procurement, and I'm not going to get into some of the specific governments muck-up, there is the actual problem that sometimes, for all they're talked about in the press, the British, American, and Canadian procurement programs are not the worst programs in the whole of the Western world. In fact, there are countries which exceed their issues by orders of magnitude. Even at the same time as those countries are sometimes being held up as shining examples by which America, Britain, or Canada should learn from. When you look actually into the content of their procurement decisions and their decision-making process, they are actually shown to be absolutely beyond the wall terrible. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to get into it because that turned into a whole national politics debate issue, and that's not what I'm going in for. But yeah, it's fun. So, operational support, logistics, and transports. Now, this is something, again, which is about growing the strategic reach of carriers, and it's something which is actually more recent than World War II. Although there are certainly aircraft used in World War II for giving supplies. Remember, the Swordfish, which flew aboard Illustrious with the photos, which had been, of course, not nicked in their entirety by the Royal Navy officer who'd flown to Malta, but were actually carefully studied and remembered when he got back. He also brought with him a whole shipment of potatoes back to the ship. So he landed with information and chips. He made everyone very happy. Now, the thing is, these are force enablers. The longer you want to operate away from home, the longer you want to operate, the greater the distance you want to operate away from the shore, the more strategic mobility you want in terms of your resupply, the more aircraft like this become very, very useful. And also it adds another layer of reach. The ability to insert personnel onto the ground, to do search and rescue, to recover pilots. Because pilots, the squidgy organic bits in your aircraft, are expensive assets to maintain, train, recruit. And then if you lose one, goodness gracious me, the paperwork! Let alone the grieving families and all the other issues. You want to recover them. You truly do. So they are part of it. And today, again, with most modern carrier groups, we are looking for multi-role, multi-purpose aircraft. And this has been a really interesting thing to get into. You notice I haven't included the Osprey in this mix. I specifically did not stick the Osprey up here. I also didn't stick out the current COD. Because as good as it is, I felt the older one deserved to be up here. I felt the trader deserved it more. And in terms of the EH-101 Merlin, again, that's a good example of a helicopter which does it all. As said, I think it would have been really interesting if they had gone with, and the idea was quite literally, you have them all built in the ramp version, and you could literally roller the containerized system onto the aircraft, and if you have two doors, a folding door either side of the aircraft, you pick one of those doors, and that would be turned into, you'd slot in the thing for airborne early warning, or if it had, it would have a hole built in the bottom, or you could have the dipping sonar go out the side, or you could have literally a hole built in the bottom in the airframe that you could unplug or take the bits out, boom, 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 sonar drops through it. Well, hey, we're away. There are all sorts of options of how you could have done this. It would have made individually aircraft slightly more expensive, but honestly, long term, it could have been a really interesting system because you'd have disconnected the systems from the airframe. So it would have turned your helicopter fleet into kind of a stand-flex module fleet, whereby you'd have been putting the systems in there, and taking them out, and you could refit, repair, you could update those systems very easily without having need to rewire the whole airframe. And then if you needed to if you got a new airframe, well, we just design it to fit those systems, or we modify those systems to fit in that airframe. Megastar, I know they once did efforts to use the C-130 as a COD. They did all sorts of testing of the C-130. The problem is, it's almost too big for the job. And it takes up the entire frigating flight deck when it lands. Whereas the COD can be, if necessary, stored in the hangar. It can be launched, recovered. You can have multiple of those on a roll. Yes. It's kind of like a stand flex system, the idea. It's a really good idea. You might have noticed, because I know I'm not going to be on Discord, I have actually been leaning this towards being slightly longer than normal. I am trying to keep this going for a while for you all, because I feel guilty because I'm not going to be on Discord much in a bit. Because I think my ears are going to be playing up enough, so, sorry about that. The Osprey is not the best of both worlds. The Osprey is an attempt to try and make something the best of operates. What is the aircraft in second pick? That is the predecessor of the Greyhound. That is the C1 Trader. And that's the original COD, really. Grumman C1 Trader. Honestly, the US Navy realized they needed something to do the COD role, and they took their anti-submarine aircraft, the S-2 Tracker, and went, what can we do with this? And they could do something with that airframe. Yes, I know, Jack Ray. That would be a very good idea for an video. You keep putting it up for a video. Eventually it'll get through. They could do a lot of things with the C-130, but the trouble is, and this is something strange, this is something to think about. Again, carriers have a limitation. They have a hard limitation on their size and shape. In terms of, they're as big as they're going to be. And you might be able to do it, or you might be able to operate from it with a C-130, but it's going to take up a lot of space. Unless you want to try and develop a folding wing C-130. And have lifts big enough to dock it down. So you can offload it in the hangar level while carrying on air operations, rather than having to shut down the flight deck because the COD aircraft landed. I would say the original COD aircraft, you've pointed out Grom Avenger, A1 Sky Raiders, there's also Fairy, Gannet, and all sorts of things which are used in a carrier on board delivery role. But they're not the original COD aircraft because they're not designed for it. They are adapted for it, they are utilized for it. They are successions from the idea of the Swordfish and the other ASW large torpedo bomber aircraft being used to transport the mail. There is a difference between what is basically an adaptation where they're going, oh, we could maybe carry some stuff and we can maybe carry some people and these things to a full-on blown carrier-on-board delivery aircraft. You're talking about incrementals until you get to an actual COD aircraft. Blackmeister, so in theory, if a nuclear-powered carrier ran at full speed between two theatres of operations, they could be resupplied by a near constant stream of transport planes by the time they arrive. In theory, if you have enough transport airplanes and you're able to fly them from enough close enough spaces to keep it up going, yes. Basically, they'd have to keep flying backwards and forwards they'd have to keep flying from one space to the carrier, flying forward, then flying up to catch it, and all sorts of things. But you could theoretically do it if you wanted to. Runon, tell them US Marines they can have an on-call spooky Spectre support if they can develop a folding wing C-130. Don't say that. The US Marine Corps actually would do it. They would actually do that. And then we have presents. I was often asked, why was HMS Ark Royal quite so tall? You know, honestly, you'd think the Royal Navy would build a carrier which was longer. Not taller. Why build it quite so tall? Surely a longer carrier, with the stuff spread out more, would be better. It would increase the length to beam ratio for starters, which would mean they could potentially do a higher speed and all sorts of things. So why build tall? Well, the Royal Navy has an official answer. You know, have you seen the waves in the North Atlantic and North Sea? And that really does put a small kibosh in the idea of her being a Pacific carrier. The Royal Navy couldn't afford to have a specialist carrier for just one operation, one scenario. She was their strike carrier, as I've often discussed. The treaty limitations produced strike carrier. But why build her so tall? The answer is this. Presence. You see, when she's parked in your port, she's massive. She towers over pretty much everything. They truly do. They tower over. She towers over pretty much everything. And this makes her very visually impactful. And it's the same with the US when they're going for super carriers. Having carriers which are that big, that massive, when they show up, they have an impact. They have a status. They're going, we're here. You can see us. We can see you. There's all those various posters the US Navy puts around most of America, which is X number of acres of American soil wherever you want it. I think it's 4.4 acres, but you're gonna have to. You could correct me because I could be wrong. I haven't seen the poster in a while. So these are vessels which allow the Royal Navy to show up and be an image, or the US Navy to show up and be an image. And again, we can also talk about HMS Hood. She has a similar cachet. We all know she's a battle cruiser. She is not the biggest. She's not the meanest, bestest battleship, capital ship in the world. At any point, she's a battle cruiser. She's a warmed-over battle cruiser design that has been turned into a battle cruiser of the lightest scenario. Well, but she's also the biggest. She turns up, she's the longest, she's the largest, she looks proud, she looks powerful. And to people who don't realise the frigging difference, i.e. people who chuck battle cruisers into a fight like Battle of Jutland, if you don't realise the frigging difference, you see big powerful ship, you think that's the biggest, meanest, scariest vessel known to mankind. There's a debate now going on between Leslie, who says it's 4.6, and Stafford, who says it's 3.5. I don't want to get in the middle of that fight, so I'm going to leave that. I'll let them find out and work it out, and then I'll tell everyone what they say in chat. But because I'm not getting an argument between Leslie and Stafford. No one would sensibly get in an argument between Leslie and Stafford. They're both far too good at their research. But that's the point of an aircraft carrier. It's not an airfield on a ship. It's more than that. Sometimes it's literally. Sometimes you listen to people like going, "It's just an airfield on top of a hull." That's all it is. It's not really a proper ship. It is a full ship. It's a full integrated air defense systems, all sorts of things. It's far more than an airfield. It's a regional air defense headquarters. It's a strike command bunker. It's a full intelligence scenario, a coordination system. It's got all its air defenses and all its own weapon systems included. And power supply, and crew, and all the facilities to support them. An aircraft carrier turns up. That's a huge amount of capability just arrived next to you. And you have to think about that. Lymerus could turn a decommissioned supercarrier into a mini mobile football stadium. You could. You could. Let's be honest, it's big enough. It's coming up on 10:30. Thank you. When it reaches 10:30, someone remind me and I'll take the pills. Oh, I just dropped some on the floor. Oh, this is going to be fun. Oh, that's the full pack. And then, yes, there's the fact that when the carrier turns up, it often has a full task crew with it. It needs a full task crew with it, because that's what you're projecting. The trouble is when we start talking about 1v1 fights, we're talking absolute twaddle. You don't have a 1v1 fight. It's not the carrier versus X, Y, or Z. It's not the carrier versus that missile system. It's the carrier battle group versus the melee of missile systems which already chucked at it. And the point is, they're big. They're powerful statements of capability. And at the centre of their task group, you are looking at something which is a full-blown capability. You're looking at something which, honestly, is more combat power than you probably would have faced from the entire Grand Fleet when it turns up, in terms of ability to actually punch through you. A modern carrier battle group. One of the interesting things that I think has the Royal Navy has especially experienced in recent years, after having got the Queen Elizabeth back in service, is the fact that, hang on, these are not like the Invincible class. And that affects the escorts you need and the escort capabilities you need. Type 45s in the configuration they were built in, without the Mark 41 VLS being fitted for but not with it, and various other things, meant that they were very good area air defense ships, but they're not really general purpose escorts. They're not able to launch Tomahawks. They're not able to do sorts of things which you actually need some of the task force to do, because honestly, having TALAMs, that's tactical land attack missiles, long-range anti-ship missiles, as part of a task group on its escorts, is a great force expander when you have got long-range strike aircraft. And it truly is a capable vessel and a capable system. But you need to build that into your task group. The task group is built both to complement and be complemented by the carrier. It's an integrated operational force. We think of ships as being these independent organizations, and they really are. They really do have to be completely self-sufficient, but at the same point they have to be integrated within the whole. Someone once tried to explain to me that a carrier battle group is like a brigade. And I listened to them, and they were describing brigades as the self-sufficient organism, and that a carrier battle group must be self-sufficient like it. And I listened to that, and I went, but brigades are function. They're infantry, armoured, all these things. Well, yes, but you have a collection of them together in division. And to me, therefore, a carrier battle group sits more akin to a division, in that you have these independent capabilities. The anti-submarine warfare brigade, which might be made up of a couple of anti-submarine warfare frigates and your helicopters, but that's your anti-submarine warfare brigade. Your air defense brigade, which are your destroyers, your fighters, your airborne early warning aircraft. And, you know, you might have strike capability, which might be all your surface ships. Strike brigade, which is made up of all your surface ships with their attack missiles and your aircraft from your carrier, and so forth. And you start to realise that it's not so much one brigade or separate brigades, it's intermixed brigades where the assets fall into different headings depending on what they're doing, which makes it far more like a division in many ways in terms of its self-sufficiency and in terms of its organisation. And that's really what you have to think about it when it turns up. When a carrier battle group turns up, you are sending an entire formation to someone. An entire capability. Thank you, Night 6 everyone. And they have to take note of that. They have to think about that. And there is they have to take note of that because of the capabilities of the whole force. So here you go, is a classic picture. And I would argue this explains everything you need to know between the difference between in their time, and I would say it was very much in its time, the difference between a fleet carrier and a supercarrier. Because Ark Royal at full tonnage is roughly 55,000 tons. That's 60,000 short tons, 53,950 long tons. But still, if we go back to our little sort of thing back here, greater than 50,000 tons. So it's into the fleet carrier territory. And could carry... Usually 50 or so aircraft. Often 40. But again, the British were, as always, what can we put in the hangar, not including deck parking, and not including overstuffing the hangar, because we're not going to get any funding to do it. The reality is this. For most nations, the supercarrier as a concept, and I know the French are talking very interesting conversations about their next carrier, is not really a necessity. Why has the McDonald's appeared?
Because I was hungry.
Oh, thank you. Hey, McDonald's has appeared. I got chicken nuggets. I ain't sharing. See, there's a reason I keep my sister around. Not just because of the risk of food poisoning, but because of the chicken nuggets which occasionally arrive. And that does help with the fact that I've just taken medicine and I haven't got any food other than iron brew. I'd say the difference between Implacables and Midways as built and Midways as evolved post-World War II. Now, the thing is about aircraft carriers is they are a combination of the known and the unknown. Very good, Brandon. Very good, it's Mickey D's. Although, as my ex and quite a lot of my family would tell you, it's Mackey's. Now, what do I mean it's a mixture of a known and an unknown? You can know your opponent has a carrier. You can know what aircraft they have on it. They can all be known facilities and known systems. But you don't ultimately know where it's going to come from. Unless you can accurately track it with satellites, and everyone's working on systems to stop satellites tracking them. And that can be as simple as making sure you're going in the wrong direction when the satellite passes over, so they don't really know where you're going, to blinding the satellite with lasers, to something accidentally bumping into the satellite in space. There's all sorts of options. But the fact is, to try and track a full carrier battle group takes a lot of resources once they're out in the open ocean. So you know the firepower they have, you just don't know where it's going to hit. So you have a problem immediately there of a dilemma of where do you defend, how do you defend. As I've often said on this channel, the best form of defense is a good offense. But you can't aim an offense at nothing. You can't go charge at that patch of water, because you charge over there, they turn out not to be there. You've just wasted a whole lot of fuel and resources and they probably hit somewhere else. And that is ultimately the problem for aircraft carriers. And that's ultimately why they win as a capital ship over a battleship. Because the battleship at the center of a group, it's powerful. But it's the radius of its guns. Aircraft, they can do buddy stores and refuel each other in flight. They can have dedicated tankers aboard. They could have very long ranges themselves and be armed with very long range missiles. All these things can grow things to a massive extent. If we consider the aircraft which I bring up quite often, the wonderful A6 Intruder. One of the most cost-effective, valuable aircraft ever built by the US Navy. I would argue to point with anyone on that one. Had a range of 878 nautical miles with maximum payload and combat range. That means it, on its own, could hit something 878 miles away. The point is, though, it could then be armed with various forms of attack missiles, including the standoff land attack missile, which is, of course, a version of the Harpoon. And that has an operational range greater than 60 nautical miles. So pretty much, they gave a carrier a strike radius of damn near 1,000 nautical miles. Damn near. Excuse the French. So that meant this carrier could be sitting anywhere 1,000 nautical miles away from you, and it could reach out and touch you. It could reach out and impact you. And that's a lot of ocean to cover. Think about it. Think about how much ocean it is to watch, which is 1,000 nautical miles away from things you care about. And also, let's say it's only 800 miles from your coast. Think about how many things could be within 1,000 nautical miles of that carrier that you have to defend. The thing is, though, the carrier air group is responsive. And as the threats were felt to be dying down, as the capabilities of potential opponents were felt to be dying down, as the world was felt to be getting safer because the Cold War had ended, everyone was going to be peaceful from now on. Aircraft like the E6, I got rid of. You standardize onto one aircraft because it's cheaper. And yes, we are recreating some of that range with the modern aircraft. But if you consider the absolute bomb truck that a A6 was, and when I say bomb truck, its maximum capability when it was operating from shore was 60,000 pounds. It could carry 18,000 pounds of weaponry. Now, again, you can point to the F-35, which we discussed earlier. And if we get back to the F-35 stats for that, you will notice the F-35 is sitting there with a total of 18,000 pounds total weapons payload. This is why I included the F-35 in this system, in this analysis. But saying that, what would a modern equivalent version of the E6 be? Because the E6 was not built around stealth. The E6 was not built around being that aircraft, a fighter aircraft or anything. It was literally built around being a bomb truck. If you built an equivalent economical bomb truck for a carrier today, what could you put on it? What could you build? if the fighters, the arguable equivalent of the Corsairs, and that sort of generation of fighter bombers, are now carrying 18,000 pounds of weapons total, which is going to be a mix of air-to-air weaponry and attack weaponry. Imagine what a dedicated strike aircraft could carry. And yes, the total capacity does include external munitions, which does make its stealth not as effective. But again, you're hopefully launching long-range weapons, and it's still stealthed to an extent. It's not as stealthy, but it's not stealthed. No, I'm talking about taking something like the A6 Intruder, a bomb truck idea, and literally expanding it. Now, Brandon, you've asked a question. Can I offer any opinions on Chinese carrier capabilities? That's going to be the first topic of conversation when we get back to doing build comps. Which is probably going to end up going from my YouTube channel as a podcast. Because it just saves on money for everyone. It really does. And yes, you could make it a bomb truck drone. The problem with that, and the only real problem we have with bomb truck drones, and honestly, I quite like the idea of them for this mission. If they're not going into enemy territory, they're literally just going to a point on the world's globe and launching their weapons. Honestly, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I'll be interested to see how the US Navy's carrier and uncrewed carrier program, carrier tanker program goes, because I have a feeling that could develop a bomb truck. Because quite a lot of people are very keen on the UCAV, and I wondered if the problem with the UCAV, the X-47, I think it was the X-47B as well, if I remember correctly. Or was it the X-47C? I think it was the X-47B. It was a designated penetrator. And I think there are some worries about peer engagements between such aircraft and whether the enemy can spoof them and take them over. Or disrupt communications in some ways. That would be the only reason which would make sense to me. I haven't been told. I haven't asked this question, so I haven't been told by anyone. So I therefore cannot be claimed to be being given displaying any information. But the only thing that would make sense to me for not pursuing a program like the X-47B is if you're worried about communication interception and you're losing control of your aircraft and you have a highly sensitive stealth aircraft. But then it makes sense to me that the first role you develop for a bomb truck aircraft would be a tanker. Because again, one of the things the A6 Intruder really did well was it had the KA-6D variant, which was its tanker version. I think what you probably do in that scenario, and this again is me spitballing it, so please note, this is entirely off my own back. Basically, my bomb trucks would be loyal wingmen. So I'd have maybe 3 of them per crewed aircraft. I'd probably at that point want a 2-seater aircraft, so I would literally have a second person to be concentrating on controlling the bomb trucks. But I'm sure it'll be made a single-seat aircraft, and it'll probably be rolled into the roles of the F-35 because that'll save money. If I was the USN, I'd make it in roles of the F-18F. And maybe E-18G, but they're probably too useful for other things. And pretty much would use that to sort of... That would go out with those aircraft. Doesn't matter the load it's carrying. If it's carrying some extra weapons, great. If it's carrying fuel and air-to-air weapons, that's fine, because it's not there to carry the bomb load. It's there to make sure they get to the point at which they're firing their target. They're firing their bombs. They're firing their missiles. Get out to their point, fire their missiles, and leave. And ideally you want something that can carry 6 to 8, 150 to 200 mile range missiles. Faster systems, doesn't need to be hypersonic, but do need to be fast and low flying. Because let's be honest, it's still the curvature of the Earth, which is your best defense against enemy defenses. And just launch them. I think Black Maximus, once you are adding extra engines and things into the F-35, you are building a sufficiently different aircraft that you might as well actually be developing a different aircraft. You are doing massive changes to its avionics and its airframe. Trying to do and adapting the F-35 means that F-35 will end up as close to the F-35 as the Super Hornet is to the Hornet. I.e., they're a completely different airframe. It's just given the same name for cover. I do quite like there's a whole debate over bomb truck going on now. Do you want to leave a payload of bobs unsupervised with unrestricted access to a cargo vehicle? I love the chat. It really does make me fun. Sorry, I licked my lips there, didn't I? I had barbecue sauce and I did it unthinkingly. I should have done it more discreetly. Rebecca, carrier-based UAVs are the future in conjunction with F-18s, F-35. They certainly are, probably. Let's be honest. And I do a lot of people go, UAVs are going to make carriers extinct. And you go, no, because the UAVs are going to get big enough, they're going to need carriers to operate them. And to carry enough of them, you're going to need a large carrier. We've already seen that. Yes, the micro UAVs and all the small ones are really getting a lot of attention, man. But they're very short-ranged assets. Very short-ranged assets. The long-range UAVs will be back in the game very shortly, and they're going to be big. Next generation, those are going to be, yeah. Worst thing to hear from a drone. I can't do that, Dave. Point, the Super Hornet name was to get designed through Congress. Yes, because Congress have regularly not noticed when the ship... Let's be honest. The US Navy learnt from the past masters of this, because how did the Royal Navy get brand new ships through Parliament? Great rebuilds! This ship isn't a new ship. No, we just put it through a great rebuild. You look at some of the Royal Navy warships which lasted in service almost a century, and they went through 2 great rebuilds in their career. And you go, yeah, every 30 years it goes through a great rebuild. How much of the original ship survived? Let me give you a clue. It's not a ship of Theseus. Next right, is that a strain or injury below next right eye? No. I had a wart. I iced it with bazooka that Veruca stuff. It's now going through the several stages of post-wart upset, and we'll see if I have to ice it again in a couple of weeks' time. See, like, Alex, in the Tom Clancy book, Death of Honor, the AWACS could guide missiles. Could it be not be such an aircraft doing the guidance mission now? Certainly, there is the option. Even with F-35s, they can do this, but with AWACS as well. It's quite well been discussed that modern aircraft and modern systems do data link together. And they can share firing solutions. So what you have is a system of sensors and shooters. And the thing is, you basically empower decision makers as low as you can down in the chain of command, so that they can see the information from a sensor, and they can designate a shooter. The most appropriate shooter to that. So, doesn't matter which thing detects it. That could be a ship, that could be an airborne early warning, that could be a satellite, that could be any of the systems within that data grid. They will pull that data together, they will synthesize that data, and they'll use that to produce a target solution. Brandon, it makes me wonder how much hand-wringing is going on in naval air companies. Let me put it this way. The Royal Navy's always had a bit of a funny approach to aircraft, because the legacy of having observers generate the vast majority of your naval aviation doctrine is that you perceive aircraft far more as tools and less as extensions of yourselves. Pilots tend to be one with their aircraft. It's kind of like you when you're driving in your car. You know, there's a relationship that builds up there. You feel it's an extension of you. Your passengers don't have the same feelings towards your car that you do. Especially your front seat passenger, who's often might be acting as navigator if the GPS isn't working, and is generally chucking things at you, changing radios because they want good music. Occasionally, you know, I don't know, doing the kiss tax every time you go over the center of middle of a bridge. All those things happen. They're not going to have the same relationship with the car that you have. It's the same with observers. They don't have the same relationship with aircraft that a pilot will have. And so, the thing about uncrewed aircraft is they are the truest example of the fact that aircraft are tools, not necessarily these mythical things. How that adapts is going to be interesting. I think the other interesting thing is how you approach people piloting uncrewed aircraft. Whether they insist they have to be officers or whether they can be NCOs. I think that's going to be an interesting scenario, how that gets set up. how you design the systems, whether they are made more fluid and like you control computer games. Sensibly, they should be based around systems which people play as computer games, because that's what it's closest to. And I often wonder if you should actually, in some ways, degrade the graphics so it becomes more like a playing computer game and less obvious to our minds it's real life. But I'm told that is not a good way to go, and I do generally agree with it. I don't think uncrewed aircraft will reduce the need for aircraft carriers. In fact, I can imagine they can make them more important, because the thing is, we can refuel aircraft in the air, we can't rearm them. And with uncrewed aircraft, because they haven't got a crew on board, being able to rearm, repair, and maintain them becomes even more important, especially the more sophisticated they become. Having that secure base with the best facilities available in order to sustain them becomes even more important the more advanced your aircraft become, and the less human involvement they have. Because the less you have the squidgy organic bit to compensate for when things go wrong. And sometimes they compensate well, sometimes they compensate badly. That's the whole problem, the squidgy organic bit. You can't necessarily predict that. But I think, therefore, it's going to make aircraft carriers even more important with uncrewed aircraft. Safford, I know. I have seen some of your posts, and I do realise I didn't want to bring it up. You are going to be very disappointed when your car goes. Trust me. The worst wrench for me was my little blue, and I put pictures up in here before of her, my little blue Subaru Impreza wagon. I mean, I miss that car. I love my Volvo, I really do. It's a lovely car. Warsprite is a lovely, lovely car, but I do miss Nade. I think there was at least 2 months, a year in the year before COVID, that I spent more time in my car driving than I spent at home. Actually, than I spent in a bed. Oh no, random. Look, I never say I'm an expert. I'm a naval historian, war studies PhD, who is a perpetual student of the topic. And I'm always trying to learn more and always trying to think more about it. That's my policy. If I am never going to be right 100% of the time, because I'm always a product, my answers are always a product of the information I have. And that is as correct as I know it to be. But it might not be correct. It's as correct as the information I've read and the information I've studied on it. The difference, I would always say, between people like me and people who are interested is I have the entire time of my day to do this stuff. So I dedicate, on average, a week to doing the videos for YouTube, etc. I will put a good 36 hours a week into that. I also do teaching on top of that for about another 12 hours. And then writing books and researching stuff to do with my book work, etc. That's probably another 36 hours on that. And then there's probably consultancy as well if I can chuck that in. And that's my average week. There are very few days when I don't do naval history for at least 8 to 10 hours a day. And that makes me very boring from one angle, but it also is a function of being a functioning insomniac, so let's be honest, I'm mostly reading when everyone else is asleep, so it's hardly boring for them, and it's hardly boring for me, because they're asleep, so they can't entertain me. I can't entertain them. They need their sleep. I'm just the oddball who doesn't. So that's the only advantage I have. The hours I spend doing it. Leslie, you can call it a wetware. I will call it the squidgy organic bit. I prefer my phraseology. You are consistent, at least. I try, Richards. Marilyn, how soon might uncrewed aircraft pilot themselves via AI or advanced software? I know human pilots all. Well, the thing is, they can do that to an extent without human pilots at all at the moment now. The human pilot for most systems, for most of their flight, is there for the maneuvers when we're talking critical, inputting course changes and course directions, not actually flying the aircraft. Or for taking decisions and instructing the execute of the actual firing weapons. That's the human in the loop process. I don't know if we are going to reach a scenario where we are comfortable with the AI or any onboard computer, no matter how smart it is, making the decision to fire weapons without a human in the loop. And whilst you might program in changes, you might have the aircraft, as much as the aircraft can fly itself, I don't think necessarily you will have an AI route plan or routing it without, again, a human involvement. Human going, we need you to cover here, here, and here. So I think you have to get away from the concept, especially with the larger UCAVs, of pilot, so much as a director. Think of it like you do your computer games with aircraft. When you're, let's say, Red Alert or those old games, or some of the sort of newer things of Galactic Civilizations, or all those games. Or even UAD. You direct the ship where you want it to go. It gets there. Heads in that direction until you tell it otherwise. It can engage targets and select targets the moment you've given it permission to fire. But until you give it permission, it doesn't fire. The trouble is with going too much in the computer control scenario is not that you can lose control. And actually, I don't see the Chinese going down that route any more than we do. I would say China as a government is even tighter on control of its assets, and even more wanting to have exact control of its assets and make sure they're doing exactly what it wants to do, than even the Western governments are. Certainly from my experience of dealing with their students at King's and other places, which was a while back. I would say, therefore, that they are not any more likely to invest in AI control systems. There is a difference between having AI intelligence analysis checked by a human. There is an issue, and writing up a targeting list and all those sorts of things, and maybe even preparing a mission brief and a mission plan of routes, etc. But I do not see it being executed by AI and controlled by AI. because I see the human in the loop still maintaining an important level in our operational requirements. And if you consider the British are more extreme than this than the Americans, if you consider our strategic deterrent system, that has more of a human in the loop presence than the Americans do. And the Americans sort of, I don't see them being any keen on the idea. There is a point at which, despite missiles being pretty much there in it, the thing is we fired a missile and it kills the target. We credit the pilot with the kill, not the missile. There is a very distinct point at which, when you have AI autonomous killing of humans, I think you could find yourself in a lot of trouble. And there's also, I think, a scenario there which could be very problematic. Because that is certainly a system which has the potential to get out of the genie to get out of the bottle very quickly. Are we still a small enough channel though where I can abuse my newfound mod powers for a joke? Where are Melanie and Dan, my super mods, when I need them? Where are the people I can delegate that power to? Ay, caramba. But the issue is to maintain the control loop over the UAVs or UMVs in an environment where the electronic warfare is real. That is going to be a problem, and that might actually be the problem that decides it. But in which case, that can be a very big problem for you, because then you have to make sure your systems cannot be hacked, because if you've lost control of them and you've programmed them to go off targeting, what happens if they get damaged or someone manages to get control of them and swap their friendly list for their target list, and so vice versa? I would always be worried about that scenario. And you would need to have things in case to deal with that. I know, Runon. They did ban Seneca as a joke. But the thing is, Seneca is now a mod, and that was part of the joke. And yes, there's the whole mission kill scenario. There are enough. There is also the fact that AI at this current point, even AI programmed by AI, is going to be full of errors because the original AI was programmed by humans, and humans are not perfect. I'm watching Stafford. Blue sounds like the guy I have in my car. It was cool. Maybe a name prefers vid? Oh, I could do Naid. But I think I've already done her in a video. I seem to remember I've already put pictures of her up on here. Jack Ray, I was most displeased by the joke. I know. I'm slowly getting there. And yes, we do not have real AI. Anyway. I'm going to finish there because my voice is starting to go as well on top of a lot of things, and I have to do a full days of recording and all sorts of fun things tomorrow. Tomorrow's video on key ships I hope you will like. I have gone for HMS Africa and her sisters. I hope you will enjoy them. I know I shall. It was a lovely thing to record. It is about again. Please, no laughing. I know the key ships and key aircraft series are supposed to be 25 minutes long, and it's a 90-minute long video. Again. But, you know, it's 90 minutes on the entire Ardent class. There's a lot of them. And in my defense, I also did the bit about Thomas Slade. And Admiral Hawke. And Nelson. And Pellew. And Hood. And pretty much every other admiral connected them. Thomas Clarke, have you looked at Amazon's print on demand services? I am considering that for the books, the future books. They will be. They might well be. I might well hook them up to the print on demand services as well, so people can get hard copies, can get physical copies of them. I'm not sure how much that works out at in terms of financial return for me, and I'm not sure how much I'd have to schedule the pricing because I've worked out with the Kindle pricing. I'm going to make them roughly £7 a book or something like that. Whenever you ever, Doctor, whenever you ever come in under at or under your time target, disallowing shorts. Shorts, I have to be quite critical. It has to be 59 seconds or less. And yeah, I know. I'll look into it, Thomas Clarke. When I get there, this is going to be something I'm going to do when I'm moved, and it's sorted out. Anyway. And for the mini dictatorial power and lecture, I know you're enjoying it, Runon. And as said, there is going to be a chat in Discord, and I will pop in for a short bit probably, but I don't think my ears will hold up to being on it for long. Honestly, they're being slightly better than they were earlier, probably thanks to the meds, which I've now been taking. Hopefully, thanks to the meds, which I've now been taking for a full afternoon. But you know, it's reaching the point at which my ears need bed, or at least the rest of the bed, where I will read for the night. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ins Morrison, DG40, Night 601. The light things, yeah, light carriers are coming picked up on Sunday. Sorry about that. I did mean to get to you. Honestly, I was going to get to your theoreticals and going to discuss them in the end, but my ears are just not up to it. Hopefully I'm better by Sunday. Hopefully I'm fully recovered. As I said, I'm supposed to have a full day of recording tomorrow. I've got like 4 videos on the slot to record tomorrow. Admittedly, let's see, videos requiring notes for tomorrow. I'm re-recording Triton Sunday tomorrow, so that one I need notes for. Interwar navies have money. That one I don't need notes for. I can do that from memory. Kaiserliche Marine over Deutsches Heer. That one I don't need notes for. I can do from memory. And Frischer's Courageous Flying Fish, I need notes for. The thing is, if they're a video which requires notes, they take longer to record than videos without requiring notes. And of course I have the Treaty Carriers video as well to record. But that's probably going to be Saturday night recordings. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, Ins Morrison. Thank you, Carl Gosberg. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you, Steph Thompson. Thank you, Runon. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Black Maximus. Thank you, Megascrow. Thank you, Knight 6831. John Hestad. Albert Zaski. Thank you. John Shea. Thank you. I'm not sure I've said a thank you to Leslie, but I'll say it again. Thank you, Steve, as well, who knows watching somewhere in the background. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Raptor. Thank you, James C. Stanley and Paul Amos. And thank you, everyone who's been watching. I know there are many others, but as said, my ears are starting to hurt from the sound of my own voice, which is a line I should probably not say on here because it'll probably be used against me in a meme. Ah, well, if it's happened, it happens. Frankly, today I'm not feeling well enough to worry about. Thank you, Ron Rebecca. And I'm sure I saw some new names up here, which I'm not sure if I said hello to. If I didn't, I'm going back to try and find them and say hello. Brandon Lyon, thank you, and thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed. And it won't let me go past the One's only at 9:40 p.m., so I can only go back as far as 9:40 p.m. and I can't spot them, but I'm sure they're around here somewhere. So thank you everyone who's been here. Thank you everyone who's been watching. Hope you had a nice time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope I managed to answer any questions you had, and hope to see you Sunday maybe. Thank you everyone. Thank you Drakenraid and James C. Stanley. Thank you. Doodles. And what have we got coming next week? Next week we have the Treaty Carriers. And as I said, tomorrow is going to be fun. Tomorrow is going to be Africa and Sisters. And thank you for the memberships, Jack Ray. Thank you very much. Someone was gifted a membership by Jack Ray who doesn't exist? Or does exist? I'm not sure. Thank you, Jack. I have no idea. There's a blank name just next to the membership. Someone blank was gifted a membership by Jack Ray. Thank you. Take care, and thank you very much, everyone. And as said, I'll be on the server in a little bit for a little bit of time.